Hi guys, tonight we're following the entire history of salt, the tiny white mineral that looks so harmless in your kitchen, yet once helped decide the fate of cities, armies, kings, sailors, workers, rebels, and very tired dinner guests. Imagine it at dawn, scattered like frost across a clay bowl, bright against rough fingers, sharp on the tongue, and older than every crown ever polished. How did something so small become powerful enough to shape empires? How did a pinch become a tax, a road, a ritual, a punishment, a promise? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and as you get comfortable, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is. It is always strange and lovely to think of people drifting towards sleep under different skies, all carried by the same quiet story. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself standing in the pale edge of morning, holding a few grains of salt in your palm. They are cold at first. Not icy. Exactly. But cool in the way stone is cool, as if each crystal has remembered the inside of the earth, or the bottom of an ancient sea. You tilt your hand, and the grains shift with a faint dry whisper. Such a small sound. Almost nothing. Yet the world has followed that sound for thousands of years. You lift one grain to your tongue. It dissolves at once, bright and clean, waking the mouth like a tiny bell. There is no sweetness to flatter you, no softness to make itself charming. Salt is direct. It arrives, announces itself, and disappears. Honestly. For something that cannot even be bothered to have a colour most of the time, it has a remarkable sense of importance. Around you, the scene begins in ordinary human life. A hearth smokes gently. The smell of damp clay, morning ash, animal hide, and cooked grain lingers in the air. Somewhere nearby, water moves slowly through reeds. You hear insects, a dog shifting in its sleep, the scrape of a wooden bowl. Nothing looks imperial, nothing looks grand. Yet this is where power often begins, not with trumpets, but with need. Your body needs salt. Every heartbeat, every nerve signal, every muscle movement depends on sodium and chloride, though nobody in the ancient world says it that way. They do not speak of electrolytes. They speak of craving, taste, weakness, strength, and survival. They know that animals seek salt. They know people sweat it out under hot sun. They know food without it can feel strangely unfinished, like a story missing its ending. Mainstream history gives salt a steady, practical role almost everywhere people settle. It seasons food, yes, but more importantly, it preserves it. Meat, fish, vegetables, cheese, and hides can last longer when salt draws out moisture and slows decay. Before refrigeration, that is not a culinary bonus. That is winter. That is travel. That is whether a household eats during lean months or stares sadly into an empty storage jar, which, let us be honest, is not the cozy bedtime image anyone ordered. You walk across packed earth toward a low shelter where fish hang from a frame. Their skins are stiffened with salt. The smell is strong, briny, smoky, and not entirely polite. A child wrinkles their nose. An older woman does not care. She rubs salt into the flesh with practiced hands, pressing it into cuts, turning freshness into time. The gesture is repetitive, patient, and deeply intelligent. Salt is being used as a tool against the future, and that is one reason rulers eventually notice it. Anything necessary becomes valuable. Anything valuable becomes countable. Anything countable attracts officials with tablets, seals, ledgers, bags, guards, and the deeply human talent for making simple things complicated. Salt moves from hand to hand, then from village to market, from market to caravan, from caravan to treasury. You can almost hear the soft clink of measures, the mutter of bargaining, the suspicious pause when someone thinks the salt has been dampened to increase its weight. Some tricks are ancient because, apparently, people have always been people. There is a quirky little tidbit tucked into salt's long reputation in many cultures. Spilling salt became unlucky, wasteful, or even morally suspicious. Later traditions imagined spilled salt as an omen, something to be corrected by tossing a pinch over the shoulder. The exact origin is tangled, and the custom-gathered meanings over time. But underneath the superstition sits a very practical truth. Salt was precious. To spill it carelessly was not just messy. It was a tiny domestic tragedy. A dramatic one, perhaps, but kitchens have always had their theatre. You pass into a settlement where the morning is warming. The air smells of wet reeds and boiled brine. Steam rises from shallow pans. Workers tend fires, their faces damp, their arms dusted white where crystals have dried on skin. The heat presses against you. The brine pops and murmurs. Salt forms slowly, appearing from water as if by magic, although magic here means labour, fuel, patience, and someone's aching back. People learn that salt can come from many places: seawater, salty springs, mineral deposits, lake beds, desert flats, and underground seams left by vanished oceans. That fact alone makes salt global, but not evenly available. Some communities live near it, others must trade for it. Geography quietly begins to write social history. A coast, a spring, a mine, a dry basin. Any of these can turn into a centre of work and exchange. Historians still argue whether salt should be seen mainly as a driver of political power, or as one important thread among many in the making of complex societies. It is tempting to give salt a crown and call it the secret ruler of history. That would be wonderfully tidy, and history does enjoy refusing to be tidy. Grain, water, metals, animals, forests, disease, belief, and violence all matter too. But salt has a special talent. It enters the body, the kitchen, the storehouse, the tax office, the road, the treaty, and the rebellion. It is intimate and administrative at the same time. Very few minerals manage that kind of social schedule. You feel the crystals again in your palm. They are smaller than seeds, but they carry landscapes inside them, a dry seabed under a white sun, a brine well covered in mist, a caravan bell in desert air, a fisherman's hands stiff from cold water, a ruler's seal pressed into clay, a monk's simple meal, a soldier's ration, a mother preserving food for a season not yet arrived. The atmosphere softens as the day settles around you. Smoke thins upward. A breeze brings the scent of salt, mud, and distant water. Somewhere, someone laughs while measuring too little and asking too much. Somewhere else, someone tastes a stew and decides, with the authority of all humanity, that it needs just a bit more. You understand now why salt is never merely salt. It is flavour. Yes, but also preservation, labour, memory, control, and desire. It is the mineral that makes food last. Bodies function, trade routes matter, and governments behave in ways that make ordinary people sigh heavily into their soup. The grains in your hand slowly warm to your skin. Their sharp edges press lightly into your palm. You close your fingers around them, and the world grows quieter, as if history itself has leaned closer to whisper. This small white mineral will travel through deserts, temples, kitchens, mines, oceans, prisons, and protest marches. But for now, it rests with you in the early light, simple and silent, waiting to reveal how much of human life has always depended on what dissolves almost the moment it is tasted. You walk where there are no fields yet, no city walls, no written laws, no kings pretending the sunrise is somehow their personal achievement. The world is older, wider, and less arranged. Grass bends under your feet. Pebbles press through the soles of rough-hide sandals. The air smells of damp earth, crushed leaves, animal musk, and distant water warmed by the sun. Somewhere in the brush, a bird gives a sudden sharp call, then silence gathers again like a blanket. Here, salt is not a product, it is a longing. You feel that longing in the bodies around you. Small bands of humans move with the seasons, watching the paths of animals, learning where water pools, where berries ripen, where herds pause, where stone can be struck into a useful edge. They do not carry maps, but they carry memory. A bend in the river, a ridge shaped like a sleeping back, a patch of clay that dries pale, a place where deer gather and lower their heads to the ground, licking at something hidden in the soil. You crouch beside one of these places. The mud is pocked with hoof prints. The smell is earthy, mineral, faintly sour. Animals have come here again and again, scraping the surface, tasting the ground. These natural mineral licks are quiet signposts in a landscape without writing. Deer, bison, antelope, elephants, and other animals seek out salt and minerals because their bodies require them. Humans notice. Of course they notice. Humans are excellent at watching animals and then claiming it was their idea all along. A hunter presses 2 fingers into the damp soil, touches them to his tongue, and pauses. The taste is not strong like sea salt, but it is there, a clean mineral bite beneath the mud. You can almost see the thought forming. This place matters, not because a chief has declared it holy, not because anyone has built a shrine, but because bodies return to it. Need makes a landmark. In coastal regions, the lesson is different, but just as clear. You stand near a rocky shore where waves fold and break in slow white lines. The wind is cool and wet against your face. It carries the smell of kelp, shellfish, bird droppings, and brine. Tide pools gleam between black stones. When seawater dries in shallow hollows, it leaves a pale crust. A child touches it, tastes it, blinks in surprise, and then, with the seriousness of great discovery, tastes it again. There is no single birthplace of salt use. That is one of the humbling things about it. People in many places would have encountered salt independently in dried seawater, in salty springs, in inland lakes, in mineral deposits, in animal paths, and in the blood and flesh of hunted animals. Mainstream archaeology suggests that long before formal salt production, humans obtained salt through varied diets, especially animal foods, and through local landscapes that offered natural sources. The exact balance depended on climate, mobility, and what people ate. A coastal gatherer, an inland hunter, and a group living near salty marshes did not experience salt in the same way. You follow a band across open ground in the late afternoon. Their steps are slow. The day has been hot, and sweat has dried on skin, leaving a faint white trace. A woman carries gathered roots in a woven sling. A man has a bundle of reeds. A child walks sleepily, gripping a smooth stone that seems important for reasons known only to children and perhaps to the stone. The air tastes dusty. In the distance, low hills glow amber. They stop near a spring where the water smells different. Not rotten, not fresh, but heavy with minerals. The pool is edged with pale deposits. Someone knows this place. Perhaps their grandmother knew it. Perhaps a story tells of animals gathering here in lean seasons. Perhaps the group found it by accident and then made sure never to forget. Historians still debate how early humans understood salt beyond instinctive craving. Did they think of it as a distinct substance with special power, or simply as part of certain waters, soils, and foods? The answer slips away because the earliest relationship with salt left few clear traces. A taste on the tongue does not fossilize. A remembered path leaves no neat label for future scholars. History, being a little rude, often hides the most ordinary things precisely because everyone used them. Still, you can sense the beginnings of value. Not money, not price, not tax. Value as attention, value as return, value as knowledge worth passing on. There is a quirky detail in the landscape of deep time. Some salt licks later became famous trails, gathering places, and even the locations of towns, because animals carved paths to them over generations and humans followed. In parts of North America, for example, places known for salt attracted wildlife, hunters, traders, and eventually settlers. The pattern is not unique to one continent. The animal body makes a road, and the human foot, never shy about borrowing useful ideas, follows it. You kneel beside the tracks, noves and paws, and human footprints overlap in the damp ground. The surface is cool when you touch it. A fly hums near your ear, far off. Branches crack as some large animal moves away unseen. The place feels alive with visits, not crowded exactly, but remembered by many bodies. Food at this time is fresh, seasonal, uncertain. Meat must be eaten quickly unless smoke. drying, cold, or other methods slow its decay. Salt preservation is not yet a grand technology here, not in every group, not in every region, but the taste for salt, the recognition of salty places, and the habit of returning to them begin to matter. Survival is made from small advantages: a mineral spring during a hard season, a salty marsh that attracts game, a dried crust that seasons food, a body that feels steadier after replenishing what heat and effort have taken. As evening comes, the group settles near low shrubs. A small fire catches, giving off the smell of smoke and resin. The flames make faces appear and vanish in warm light. Someone roasts strips of meat on green sticks. Fat hisses softly into the fire. The taste is rich, but a few grains scraped from a pale stone make it brighter. You watch the expression change as people eat. Satisfaction is quiet. Nobody gives a lecture on sodium chloride. Mercifully, there are no slides. The night deepens. The ground releases the heat it held through the day. You lie under a sky filled with stars, hearing insects pulse in the dark and the occasional movement of animals near the spring. Salt is present here not as empire, not as industry, but as a whisper through instinct and memory. It gathers creatures together. It teaches roots. It rewards observation. It turns a patch of mud, a crust of shore, a bitter pool, into a place worth remembering. And in this older world, that is enough. You step into a world where people have begun to stay. The campfire has become a hearth. The path has become a lane. The shelter has become a house with walls of mud, reed, timber, stone, or whatever the local landscape politely agrees to provide. Smoke drifts from roof openings in soft grey ribbons. Dogs nose around doorways. Children run with the serious speed of creatures who have invented their own urgent business. The air smells of wet clay, stored grain, wood ash, sheep wool, and something sharp rising from a pot near the fire. Brine! A woman bends over a shallow vessel, watching cloudy liquid tremble with heat. Steam beads on her forehead. Her hands are rough from work, and the skin around her nails is whitened by mineral residue. She feeds the fire slowly, not wasting fuel. Every branch matters. Every handful of brush matters. The pot murmurs. The liquid shrinks. At the edges, pale crystals begin to form. You're seeing one of the great quiet changes of settled life. Salt becomes not only something found, but something made through technique. Not made from nothing, of course. Humans are clever, but not that clever. They collect salty water from springs, marshes, lagoons, or wells, then heat it until water vanishes and salt remains. In other places, they let sun and wind do the patient work of evaporation. Either way, the result feels almost miraculous. A clear or muddy liquid becomes a dry mineral that can be carried, measured, stored, shared, and argued over. Naturally, once people can store something, someone nearby will develop opinions about who stored more. The Neolithic world is full of experiments. People plant cereals. They herd goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle. They shape clay into pots and fire them hard. They weave baskets, grind grain, polish stone tools, build houses, bury the dead with care, and slowly turn landscapes into lived-in places. This transition does not happen everywhere at once, and it is never simple. Still, settled communities create new problems. More mouths live close together. Food must last between harvests. Animals must be managed. Surplus must be protected from rot, pests, damp, and human neighbours with suspiciously large storage jars. Salt becomes useful in this new rhythm. You enter a house with a packed earth floor cool beneath your feet. Hanging from a beam are strips of meat darkened by smoke and rubbed with salt. Near the wall sits a jar of brined vegetables, sharp and sour in scent. A small cheese rests on woven matting, its surface rubbed and drying. The room is dim and warm. You hear the soft scratch of a grinding stone, the crackle of fuel, the murmur of voices, the bleat of goats from an enclosure outside. Preservation is not glamorous, which is probably why it is so important. Salt draws moisture out of food and makes life difficult for many microbes that cause spoilage. People do not know microbes by name yet. They know patterns. Salted fish last longer. Salted meat travels better. Brined foods can survive days when fresh greens are gone. Cheese can be kept and moved. A little less hunger is a powerful teacher. In parts of Neolithic Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of early salt production in places with brine springs. One well-known region is around the Balkans, where communities exploited salty waters thousands of years ago. In China, too, early salt production developed around inland brines and lakes. The details vary by region, but the broader fact is steady once people settle. Pottery, fire, and brine create new possibilities. You watch workers carry clay vessels toward a boiling area. The ground is crusted pale in patches. Smoke hangs low and stings your eyes. Heat presses against your cheeks. The brine gives off a mineral smell, damp and bitter. When crystals gather, they are scraped out carefully, sometimes shaped into cakes or lumps, easier to store and trade. These forms are not pretty in a modern decorative bowl sort of way. They are rough, useful, and absolutely the kind of thing someone might hide under a sleeping mat if the neighbours are too curious. A quirky tidbit comes from the tools themselves. In several ancient salt-making sites, broken pottery was not just rubbish. Specialised clay containers used to evaporate brine often shattered from heat and repeated use, leaving behind huge heaps of fragments. To an untrained eye, it can look like a village had a tragic obsession with breaking pots. To archaeologists, these broken pieces can reveal the scale and method of salt production. Trash, once again, becomes history's diary. Very messy, very helpful. You step around a pile of fired clay fragments. They crunch faintly underfoot. The sound is dry and brittle. Nearby, someone lifts a crust of salt with a wooden tool. Another person fans the fire. A child watches, bored for 3 breaths, fascinated for 2, then bored again, proving that even ancient industry cannot compete with a beetle crawling up a wall. Historians still question how much early salt production encouraged social inequality. Did control over brine springs help certain families or groups gain influence? Or were these resources shared seasonally among communities? The evidence is uneven. Salt production can require labour, fuel, containers, skill, and access to the right source. That opens the door to management and status. But not every salty spring becomes a kingdom. Thankfully, sometimes it is just a very busy or smoky place where everyone would like the fire to burn properly. As you move through the settlement, you notice how salt connects ordinary tasks. It touches herding because animals need it. It touches pottery because vessels make boiling possible. It touches forestry because fuel is consumed. It touches trade because not every village has access to brine. It touches cooking because flavour matters. And anyone who says flavour is a luxury has never faced a pot of bland porridge after a long day. At dusk, the village settles into softer sound. The grinding stones slow. Animals shuffle in their pens. Smoke thins into the purple air. Someone carries a small bowl of salt into a house and places it near stored grain and dried food. The gesture is careful. There is no royal ceremony, no polished priest raising a crystal to the heavens. There is only a household protecting tomorrow. You sit near the hearth as steam curls upward, a stew thick with grain, herbs, and bits of preserved meat warms your hands through the bowl. It smells smoky, salty, earthy, comforting. When you taste it, the salt does more than brighten the food. It carries with it the spring outside the village, the potter's clay, the labour of gathering fuel, the patience of boiling, the anxiety of storage, the hope of winter survival. Outside, the night grows still. The ground is cool. The stars appear above the roofline. Inside, salt rests in a small container, plain and pale. It has become part of settled life, woven into the slow human decision to remain in one place and trust that the future can be prepared for. You walk beside the Nile in a light so golden it seems to have been poured from a jar. The river moves with a calm, heavy confidence, sliding between green banks where reeds sway and birds lift their thin legs through the shallows. Mud is soft under your sandals. The air smells of wet earth, river plants, smoke from cooking fires, and the faint dry sweetness of straw. Beyond the fields, the desert waits in pale silence, its sand glowing like heated stone. Egypt is a country of water and dryness, fertility and preservation, abundance and careful storage. Salt belongs naturally to such a place because it understands both moisture and the art of removing it. You come to a work area near the riverbank. Fish are laid out on mats, their silver bodies catching the morning. Workers clean them with practiced hands, rubbing them with salt and setting them to dry. Flies buzz, waved away by palm leaves. The smell is strong, briny, oily, and sun-warmed. It is not delicate, but delicacy is not the point. The point is that fish caught today can feed people tomorrow, and the day after, and perhaps far beyond that. In a land where the Nile's flood shapes the year, storage is wisdom. Ancient Egyptians used salt and naturally occurring mineral salts in many parts of daily life. Salt helped preserve fish and meat. It seasoned food. It appeared in offerings and household practices. Natron, a naturally occurring mixture containing sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, salt, and other minerals, was especially important. It formed in dry lake beds and desert deposits, and Egyptians used it for cleaning, drying, ritual purity, and mummification. Salt and natron are not exactly the same thing, which is the sort of detail that makes scholars pleased and casual listeners quietly reach for a pillow. Still, both belong to the mineral world of dryness, cleansing, and preservation. You enter a bakery court where women knead dough in wide bowls. Bread is everywhere in Egyptian life, from workers' rations to offerings for the gods. The smell is warm and yeasty, mixed with ash and grain dust. A pinch of salt disappears into the dough. You hear the slap of hands against wet flour, the scrape of baskets, the crackle of ovens. Nearby, jars of beer ferment, thick and nourishing, because ancient beer is less like a modern sparkling drink and more like liquid bread that has decided to be sociable. Salt does not dominate the scene, but it improves it. A little mineral brightness makes bread more satisfying. A little salt in food helps bodies working under a hot sun. Farmers, builders, sailors, soldiers, priests, and servants all live in a landscape where sweat dries quickly on skin. You can feel it yourself. Heat settles on your shoulders. The linen at your neck grows damp, then stiff. When a breeze comes from the river, it is a mercy. Now the path turns from kitchen life toward the sacred. You approach a place of preparation, quiet and shaded. The mood changes, voices lower, the smell of resin, linen, natron, cedar oil, and dry mineral dust gathers in the still air. A body lies on a table, treated not as refuse, not as an empty shell to be forgotten, but as something that must be prepared for eternity. Egyptian belief placed enormous importance on the body's preservation. The dead person's identity, spirit, and journey beyond death were tied to careful ritual attention. To preserve the body was to help maintain a person's place in the cosmic order. Natron draws moisture from the body over many days. It dries, protects, and transforms. Linen wraps follow. Resins seal. Amulets guard. Prayers speak. The whole process is both practical and sacred, which is very Egyptian in the best possible way. The divine and the administrative often stand closer together here than anyone expects. A priest's shaved head catches the light. His hands move slowly over folded linen. The cloth feels crisp and slightly rough when you touch a loose strip. Nearby bowls hold powders, oils, and minerals. The room is warm but dry, protected from the river's damp breath. Outside, life continues with donkeys braying, children calling, and someone probably complaining about grain measures, because even in the shadow of eternity, paperwork and mild annoyance survive. One quirky tidbit lies in Egyptian cleanliness. Natron was used not only for mummification, but also in washing, oral care, and ritual purification. Some ancient recipes and practices suggest people used mineral substances to clean the body and even freshen the mouth. Imagine greeting the day with a gritty mineral scrub and thinking, yes, now I am ready for civilization. Modern toothpaste has better marketing, but the instinct is familiar. You walk into a temple courtyard. Stone columns rise like bundled papyrus stems. Incense drifts in blue-grey threads. Offerings are arranged carefully: bread, beer, onions, meat, fruit, flowers, and sometimes salt or natron as agents of purity. The stone beneath your bare feet is cool in the shade. The atmosphere is hushed, formal, and scented with smoke. In Egyptian ritual thought, purity matters. Clean hands, clean spaces, clean offerings, clean words. Salt's power to dry and cleanse gives it a quiet authority. Historians still debate the exact boundaries between practical preservation and religious symbolism in Egyptian uses of natron and salt. Did the minerals gain sacred meaning mainly because they worked so well at drying and cleaning, or were they chosen because desert substances already carried associations of purity, rebirth, and divine order? The answer may be both, because human beings rarely separate usefulness from meaning as neatly as textbooks would like. A thing that saves food, clean skin, preserves the dead, and gleams pale in desert light is almost begging to become symbolic. You pause at the edge of the desert where natron deposits can appear in dry basins. The ground crunches faintly. The air is sharper here, stripped of river softness. Wind lifts tiny grains against your ankles. The horizon trembles in heat. To one side lies green Egypt, irrigated, noisy, fertile. To the other stretches dryness, dangerous and sacred, a place of tombs, gods, and transformation. Salt stands between these worlds. It belongs to water, but it remains when water leaves. It tastes of life, yet it serves the dead. It is ordinary enough for fish, solemn enough for eternity. Evening lowers over the Nile. Workers gather dried fish into baskets. Bread cools on mats. Temple doors darken. In homes, bowls are set out. Lamps flicker, and the river breathes softly in the dark. You taste a simple meal bread. Fish, onions, maybe a little beer. Salt touches everything lightly, making the food feel complete. Around you, Egypt continues its long rhythm of flood, sowing, harvest, offering, burial, and remembrance. The mineral in your fingers feels dry and clean. It is no longer only a taste. Here, it has become a bridge between hunger and storage, body and spirit, river mud and desert silence. In Egypt, salt learns to serve life by resisting decay, and to serve death by promising that something precious may endure. You enter Mesopotamia through heat, dust, and the low shimmer of riverlight. The land lies between the Tigris and Euphrates, where water makes fields possible and mud becomes architecture. Under your feet, baked earth cracks in thin lines. Date palms lean over irrigation canals. Donkeys complain with impressive commitment. The air smells of clay, reeds, dung fuel, warm grain, and river water moving slowly through channels dug by human hands. Everywhere, people are managing flow water into fields, barley into jars, labour into walls, offerings into temples, goods into accounts. Salt belongs here too, but in Mesopotamia it begins to look very organised. You walk past a canal where workers repair a bank with baskets of mud. Their feet sink into the wet clay. Someone shouts a warning as a section slumps. Nearby, fields of barley ripple in the dry wind. The harvest depends on irrigation, and irrigation depends on planning, clearing, measuring, and arguing. Very ancient arguing, but still recognisable. Whoever controls water controls life. Whoever records grain, labour, animals, oil, wool, and salt begins to control memory itself. The city rises ahead, built of mud brick, sun-coloured and massive. Walls, houses, workshops and courtyards and temples cluster in layers. At the centre, a temple complex stands high, its surfaces bright under the sun. You hear the creak of carts, the bray of animals, the clatter of pottery, the murmur of traders, and the soft scratch of stylus against clay. This is one of the great homes of writing, and writing, at first, is not mainly poetry or bedtime philosophy. It is accounting. Humanity invents literature eventually. Thank goodness. But first it wants to know who delivered the barley. Inside a storehouse, the air is cooler and heavy with the smell of grain, wool, sesame oil, leather, and mineral dust. Baskets sit in rows. Jars are sealed with clay stoppers. A scribe kneels beside damp tablets, pressing wedge-shaped marks into the surface with a reed stylus. His hands move quickly. The marks record amounts, names, rations, deliveries, obligations. Salt appears in such administrative worlds as a measured good, traded and distributed alongside other necessities. Mesopotamians used salt for preserving food, seasoning meals, caring for animals, and supporting crafts. It could come from salty soils, marshes, brines, and trade. In a hot climate, the ability to preserve fish, meat, and dairy mattered deeply. The rivers and marshes offered fish and birds. Herds offered milk and meat. Fields offered grain. Salt helped turn these foods into rations that could be stored, transported, and issued to workers. You follow a line of labourers receiving provisions. Their tunics are dusty. Their shoulders shine with sweat. One man carries a basket rope across his forehead. A woman balances a jar against her hip. A clerk measures grain. Another checks a lump or small quantity of salt. Nobody looks especially enchanted by bureaucracy, which is fair. Yet rations hold a city together. Temples and palaces organise work on a scale impossible for a single household. Canals, walls, fields, workshops, and armies all need supplies. Salt becomes part of the quiet machinery of daily survival. The taste of it reaches you in a simple meal: barley bread, onions, dates, perhaps fish dried and salted near the marshes. The fish is chewy, pungent, and strong enough to make itself known without asking permission. The salt sharpens the grain and balances the sweetness of dates. You sit in a courtyard where shade gathers beneath woven mats. A breeze carries the smell of reeds and animals. Clay cups pass from hand to hand. Someone tells a joke about a lazy official, because every civilization that has officials also has jokes about lazy officials. This may be one of history's most stable institutions. A quirky tidbit appears in the land itself. Mesopotamian farmers struggled with salinization, the buildup of salts in irrigated soil. Water brought fertility, but as it evaporated in the heat, it could leave minerals behind. Over time, fields could become less productive, especially for salt-sensitive crops. Some scholars have linked this process to shifts from wheat toward more salt-tolerant barley in southern Mesopotamia. So salt here is not only a useful commodity, it is also a slow problem in the soil, a mineral blessing with a rather passive-aggressive side. You step into a field where the earth has a pale crust in places. It crunches faintly underfoot. The farmer kneels and rubs the soil between his fingers. His face is unreadable, but his body knows concern. Irrigation has made cities possible, yet the same water can carry danger if drainage fails or evaporation concentrates salts. History is rarely polite enough to make its gifts simple. Historians still argue how much salinization contributed to political and economic changes in ancient Mesopotamia. Some see it as a major environmental pressure affecting agriculture and power. Others caution that climate, warfare, river shifts, labour organisation, and political competition all mattered too. The tablets preserve numbers, but numbers do not always confess their full meaning. A declining crop yields may whisper of salt, drought, conflict, mismanagement, or all of them sitting together like troublesome guests. As afternoon fades, you move into the marshlands. Reeds rise taller than a person. Water glints between green stems. Birds call overhead. The air smells damp, fishy, and alive. Boats made of reeds slide quietly along narrow channels. Here, salt meets water in another form. Fish are caught, cleaned, salted, dried, and carried towards cities. Marsh people know the moods of water, the hiding places of birds, the value of preserved food. Their world is not the same as the brick city, but the city depends on it more than it might admit. Back in the temple storehouse, the scribe sets a tablet aside to dry. You look at its surface, covered in small impressed signs. Salt has entered writing, not as a grand hymn, not yet as metaphor, but as quantity, a measured substance, a ration, a delivery, a controlled item. That may seem less romantic than a caravan at sunset, but it is deeply powerful. To be written down is to become part of authority. A thing recorded can be owed, taxed, stored, disputed, inherited, and inspected by someone with a stylus and a serious expression. Night comes slowly over the city, the mud bricks release their heat, lamps flicker in doorways, the smell of cooking rises lentils, onions, bread, roasted meat, dried fish. Somewhere, a tablet is being read aloud. Somewhere, a canal gate is being watched. Somewhere, a worker dips bread into a salty stew and feels, for a moment, that the day can end. You stand beneath a darkening sky, listening to the rivers move beyond the walls. Mesopotamia teaches Salt a new language, the language of ledgers, rations, fields, canals, and state power. It is still tasted on the tongue, still rubbed into food, still needed by bodies. But now it also sits in storehouses, marked into clay, folded into systems larger than any single person. The mineral has become countable, and once something is counted, history begins to lean very close. You travel east into a landscape of misty hills, river valleys, bamboo groves, and deep earth. Morning hangs pale over ancient China. The air is cool against your face, damp enough to soften the edge of every sound. You hear water dripping from leaves, roosters calling from scattered houses, and the steady knock of wood against wood near a work site. The smell is green at first, full of moss, wet soil, smoke, and rice straw. Then another scent rises, sharper and mineral, like stone soaked in old seawater. Brine is coming up from below. You stand beside a well where workers lean over a narrow shaft. Ropes creak, bamboo pipes lie stacked nearby, smooth and golden, some split and fitted together with remarkable care. Men haul heavy buckets, others pour salty water into channels and vessels. Steam drifts from boiling sheds, mixing with the scent of firewood and clay. The work is repetitive, wet, smoky, and exacting. No one looks as if they are discovering a world-changing technology. They look tired. History often arrives wearing mud on its sleeves. China developed some of the most sophisticated early systems for producing salt from brine. In regions such as Sichuan, people tapped underground brine sources, eventually drilling deep wells and using bamboo pipelines to carry liquid and even natural gas. The fully developed forms of these techniques became especially famous in later centuries, but the broader Chinese tradition of salt production is ancient and influential. The principle is beautifully simple. Find the salty water hidden beneath the ground. Bring it up, boil away the liquid, and keep the crystals. Simple, of course. In the same way building a boat is simple if you ignore the trees, tools, leaks, storms, and everyone yelling. You approach a boiling shed. Heat pushes out through the doorway. Inside, shallow iron pans sit over fires. Brine trembles, thickens, and leaves behind a crust of salt. The steam tastes bitter on your lips. Soot darkens beams overhead. Workers move with cloths wrapped around their hands, scraping crystals into baskets. Their faces shine with sweat. The floor is slick in places, gritty in others. A small mistake can burn skin, ruin a batch, or waste precious fuel. Salt here is not only household necessity, it becomes state interest. Chinese rulers learned that salt was unusually easy to turn into revenue. Everyone needed it. Production sites could be identified, transport could be supervised, sales could be taxed or monopolized. Over many dynasties, salt monopolies became a major source of government income. The state could license merchants, regulate prices, punish smuggling, and use salt profits to support armies, officials, roads, and frontier defense. A pinch in the kitchen could help pay for soldiers at distant borders. Very comforting, unless you are the person paying too much for the pinch. You move through a market town near the brine works. The street is packed hard by feet and cartwheels. Vendors call softly. Baskets of vegetables sit beside pottery, cloth, fish, tools, and small packets or blocks of salt. The air smells of soy ferment, smoke, animals, and damp wood. Buyers test quality by sight, touch, and trust, which is always risky when money's involved and humans are nearby. Some salt is clean and pale, some is greyish, some is mixed with impurities. Some may have taken a mysterious journey through unofficial hands. Smuggling is the shadow of monopoly. When governments make salt profitable, people make avoidance creative. In Chinese history, illegal salt trading became a recurring problem, sometimes linked to powerful merchant networks and even unrest. Salt smugglers could be poor villagers trying to survive, ambitious traders chasing profit, or armed bands who knew that necessity creates demand. The law called them criminals. Their neighbours might call them useful. The treasury called them irritating, which for a treasury is nearly emotional poetry. A quirky tidbit slips from the smoky edge of the well fields in Sichuan. Brine workers eventually learned to use natural gas from underground wells as fuel for boiling salt. Bamboo tubes carried the gas to fires, creating an early industrial landscape that feels almost startlingly modern. Imagine a worker in a pre-modern village controlling invisible fuel from deep earth through bamboo pipes. It sounds like a legend invented by a very practical engineer with a fondness for pandas, yet it reflects real technical ingenuity. You lay your hand on a bamboo pipe. It feels smooth, slightly damp, and cool where it lies in shade. The joints are bound tightly. Nearby, a fire breathes and snaps under a pan. Steam beads on your eyelashes. The sound of boiling fills the room, a steady bubbling that becomes almost hypnotic. Salt appears slowly, grain by grain, as if the hidden sea beneath the mountains is being persuaded to become visible. Historians still argue about the exact relationship between salt monopolies and the strength of Chinese states across different periods. Some view salt revenue as one of the pillars of imperial administration. Others point out that local conditions, grain taxes, land systems, military needs, corruption, and merchant cooperation change the picture from dynasty to dynasty. Salt was never the only answer. History dislikes single answers, possibly because it enjoys making students work harder. Still, you can see why officials cared. A magistrate's office stands near the market. Its walls smell of ink, wood, paper, dust, and old authority. Clerks copy records, seals are pressed, permits are checked. A trader bows, a little too deeply perhaps. Outside, porters shift loads of salt onto their backs, the straps cutting across shoulders. Each basket is a piece of the wider system production. Accounting, transport, sale, tax, punishment, privilege. The human side is quieter. A family in a small house adds salt to greens cooking in a pot. A labourer eats rice with preserved vegetables after a long day at the pans. A mother rubs salt into fish so it can last. An old man complains that the price has risen, and he is probably correct, because old men in markets are often historians of prices whether anyone asked or not. The salt tastes the same on each tongue, but its cost is not felt equally. As evening settles over the valley, smoke spreads low between roofs, the hills darken to blue, frogs begin calling from wet fields. The brine well stands silent for a moment, their openings black against the earth. You breathe in the mingled smell of minerals, ash, bamboo, and cooked rice. This world reveals salt as technology and policy at once. It is not merely gathered from a shore or scraped from a pan. It is drilled, piped, boiled, licensed, taxed, smuggled, debated, and folded into the machinery of rule. The crystals cooling in baskets seem plain, but they have climbed from darkness. They have passed through hands roughened by rope and steam. They have entered ledgers and kitchens, border budgets and market gossip. In ancient China, salt becomes a lesson rulers never forget control what everyone needs, and power can taste as ordinary as dinner. You follow a path made not by one traveller, but by countless feet repeating the same quiet decision. The road is narrow at first, only a pale line through grass and scrub. Dust lifts around your ankles. Dry seed heads brush your legs. Somewhere ahead, bells ring from the necks of pack animals, soft and uneven, like music that has forgotten it is supposed to keep time. The air smells of sun-warmed hide, crushed herbs, sweat, old leather, and the mineral dryness of salt packed into bundles. This is trade before it becomes glamorous in paintings. No one here looks like a legend. They look hot, careful, and slightly annoyed by the weight of things. A mule tosses its head. A trader adjusts a rope across a load. A young porter shifts a basket and winces as the strap bites into his shoulder. Salt is heavy. That is one of its least poetic qualities, and one of the most important. To move salt is to spend strength, feed animals, secure routes, negotiate tolls, and trust that the destination will reward the journey. You walk beside a caravan leaving a salt source in the early morning. The crystals are packed in sacks, baskets, skins, or moulded lumps, depending on the region and the method of production. Some salt is coarse and grey, some is white and prized, some is damp enough to clump, some has been shaped into cakes that can be counted, stacked, and carried. The forms matter because trade loves standard shapes. A lump that can be weighed or recognised is easier to sell than a mysterious heap that invites arguments, and trade already has plenty of those. Across the ancient world, salt routes formed wherever supply and need were separated by distance. Coastal salt moved inland, mountain salt moved toward plains. Brine towns sent their goods to farming villages. Desert deposits fed settled communities far away. Riverboats, pack animals, sledges, carts, rafts, and human backs all served the same purpose, moving the mineral from where nature placed it to where bodies required it. You reach a river crossing. The water slides brown and slow beneath a wooden ferry. Ropes groan. The boat rocks under sacks of salt, baskets of grain, jars of oil, and nervous chickens who have absolutely no confidence in maritime commerce. The smell changes here. From dust to mud and wet rope. Men push poles into the riverbed. A woman counts bundles under her breath. A child stares at the white salt with the solemn interest of someone wondering whether it tastes as strong as it looks. Rivers often made salt cheaper to move. Overland transport was expensive because animals had to be fed and roads maintained. Water carried weight more kindly. Towns near navigable rivers, estuaries, and canals could become distribution points where salt joined broader networks of fish, grain, timber, pottery, metals, cloth, and news. Trade is never only goods. It carries speech patterns, jokes, rumours, songs, diseases, recipes, debts, and the occasional deeply exaggerated story about bandits. You hear one now at a roadside shelter. A trader claims that a group of robbers once followed his caravan for 3 days, only to steal the salt and leave the silver. Another trader snorts and says no robber would ignore silver unless he was a donkey in a hat. Someone laughs into a cup of sour beer. The fire smells of smoke and goat fat. Outside, the night wind presses against woven walls. Salt sits in stacked bundles nearby, dull in the firelight, quietly worth guarding. A quirky tidbit comes from the way salt roads sometimes became famous enough to survive in place names. In Europe, words related to salt appear in old road names, settlements, and regions, reminding people that certain paths once existed because this mineral had to move. The famous Via Salaria in Italy, linked with carrying salt inland from the coast toward Rome, is one example of how a trade route could become a historical memory carved into geography. A road name for salt is wonderfully honest. No heroic nonsense, no poetic mist. Just yes. This way for the seasoning and survival crystals. You climb toward a mountain pass. The air thins and cools. Pine resin replaces river mud in the nose. Rocks scrape underfoot. Pack animals breathe hard, their flanks damp. Snow lingers in shaded cracks even while sunlight warms the path. Salt from mountain mines or upland brines can move down to valleys, while grain, wine, cloth, and metal tools move upward. Trade makes landscapes speak to one another. The coast sends brine, the hills send timber, the plains send grain, the mountains send salt, and the distinct sensation that your knees have been personally betrayed. At the pass, you see a small toll station. A guard leans on a spear, looking bored in the ancient and universal manner of people paid to check loads. The traders unpack documents, tokens, or agreed measures. Tolls on salt routes could enrich rulers, towns, temples, and local lords. Control a crossing, bridge, gate, ferry, or market, and you do not need to produce salt yourself. You can simply stand where salt must pass. History contains many such clever inconveniences. Historians still debate how far salt routes directly shaped political boundaries, compared with other trade goods and military needs. In some regions, access to salt clearly strengthened towns and states. In others, salt moved within larger networks where grain, livestock, metals, textiles, and strategic roads mattered just as much. The difficulty is that trade routes rarely belong to one commodity alone. They are braided paths, and salt is one bright strand among many. Still, you can feel its pull. You enter a market at the end of a long day. The square is alive with sound bargaining voices, hoofbeats, wheels, babies crying, dogs barking, metal ringing from a smith's stall. The smell is overwhelming in layers. Onions, dung, smoke, wool, dried fish, hot bread, sweat, and salt dust. Traders unload while local buyers test the goods. A farmer needs salt for cheese. A butcher needs it for curing meat. A household needs it for cooking. A herder wants it for animals. A merchant wants to carry it farther still. The crystals pass from one set of hands to another. They are weighed on a balance. They are poured into cloth. They are broken from a larger block with a short, sharp crack. Coins may change hands, or grain, wool, fish, labour, promises, and credit. In some places, salt itself can act almost like money, not because it is magical, but because it is useful, divisible, durable when kept dry, and widely desired. Useful things make persuasive payment, a philosophical truth, and also why nobody pays rent in inspirational sayings. You sit near the edge of the market as twilight cools the stones. Your fingers brush salt spilled on a table. It feels gritty and dry. A vendor sweeps it carefully into a small pile, wasting nothing. A road has ended here, but the mineral has not stopped moving. It will enter stew pots, storage jars, animal troughs, temple offerings, and packs headed somewhere else by dawn. The bells of the caravan fade into the evening. Above the roofs, the first stars appear. Salt has become motion hoof, wheel, boat, shoulder, ferry, bridge, pass, and gate. It makes roads valuable and makes distant people necessary to one another. In every grain carried across these paths, you can taste not only the mineral itself, but the long human habit of walking toward what cannot be lived without. You arrive at the Mediterranean with salt on the wind. The sea is a wide sheet of blue, restless under the morning light, its surface flashing silver where the sun touches it. Waves slap gently against stone quays. Ropes creak. Sailcloth flutters. Gulls shout as if they have urgent political opinions, which, given their tone, are probably unreasonable. The air smells of brine, tar, olive oil, fish guts, crushed herbs, warm bread, and human labour beginning early because the market waits for no one. You walk through a Greek harbour town where baskets are being unloaded from boats. Fishermen carry their catch in woven trays, scales glittering like little coins. Some fish will be eaten fresh, grilled with oil, herbs, and salt. Much more will be cleaned, salted or dried, packed and traded. The Mediterranean is generous, but freshness is brief. Without preservation, a beautiful catch can become a terrible smell with alarming speed. Salt gives the sea a longer memory. In the marketplace, fishmongers call out to buyers. A woman presses her thumb into the flesh of a fish and nods. A boy runs past with a basket of small salted fish, leaving behind a sharp scent that is both appetizing and rude. Amphorae stand in rows. Their clay bodies cool in the shade. Some hold wine, some hold oil, some hold salted fish products and sauces that later Greek and Roman eaters will find deeply satisfying, while modern noses might need a moment, possibly two. Salted fish was a major food across the ancient Mediterranean. It fed sailors, soldiers, labourers, city dwellers, and rural households. It could travel farther than fresh fish and brought protein to inland places, Greek communities, scattered across islands, coasts, colonies, and trading stations, depended on maritime networks where preserved foods mattered as much as elegant marble ever did. Philosophy may discuss the good life, but someone still has to pack lunch for the voyage. You sit near a stall where olives, cheese, figs, onions, barley cakes, and salted fish are arranged for sale. A vendor cuts a small piece for a customer, The texture is firm, the smell concentrated, the taste powerful. Salt enters quickly, followed by fish oil and sea. It is not shy food. It is food that has crossed distance and survived. A potter nearby shapes clay containers for transport. His wheel hums softly beneath his hands. Wet clay smells clean and mineral. Amphorae are practical miracles, designed with pointed bases that can nest in sand or ship holds. They carry the Mediterranean economy in their bellies. Wine, olive oil, grain, and preserved fish move through ports in these vessels, and salt makes many of those food routes safer, longer, and more profitable. You climb a low hill above the harbour. Whitewashed houses cluster near the water. Beyond them, fields of barley and vines cling to dry slopes. The Greek world is not one unified country in the modern sense. It is a network of city-states, islands, colonies, rivalries, alliances, competitions, and arguments so energetic they practically need their own weather system. Salt fits into this world through trade, diet, and geography. Some places have salt pans along the shore. Others import what they need. Coastal evaporation, rocky inlets, and lagoons all offer opportunities for gathering sea salt. In a shallow coastal pan, workers rake crystals under a hot sun. The ground gleams white and pinkish in places where briny water has dried. Your sandals stick slightly in damp patches. The air is sharp with mineral smell. Insects hover. The workers move slowly because heat demands respect. As water evaporates, salt forms in thin crusts, fragile at first, then harvestable. The process depends on weather, patience, and the simple fact that the sun does not charge wages, which must have appealed to practical minds everywhere. A quirky tidbit from the Greek world is that salt appears in language and thought not only as food, but as wit, friendship, and social life. Ancient writers sometimes connected salt with clever speech and civilized dining. A meal shared with salt could symbolize fellowship. There is also the old idea that salt sharpens not just food but conversation. Whether that is true depends heavily on the dinner guests. Of course, some people remain bland at any dosage. You enter a shaded courtyard where men recline, eat, drink watered wine and debate. The smell of roasted meat, fish, bread, wine, and garlands of herbs drifts beneath the roof. Cups clink. Someone quotes a poet. Someone else disagrees too quickly. A servant brings a small dish of salt. The mineral sits quietly among all this talking, making every bite more vivid. It is humble and indispensable, which is more than can be said for every speaker in the room. Greek medicine and natural philosophy also noticed salt. Thinkers observed its drying qualities, its taste, its role in food, and its presence in seas and springs. They did not understand chemistry as later science would, but they asked questions about nature, bodies, elements, and balance. Salt, with its strange ability to emerge from water as a solid, invited explanation. How can the sea be liquid, yet leave crystals behind? Why does salty food preserve? Why does the body crave it? Ancient answers varied, and some were wonderfully confident for being so wrong. A human tradition, very much alive. Historians still disagree about the scale and economic importance of salted fish production in different Greek regions. Some centres clearly produced and traded preserved fish widely, especially around the Black Sea, the Aegean, and other rich fishing waters. Yet the evidence is uneven, because fish bones, salt pans, amphora residues, and written references do not always line up neatly. The ancient economy whispers through fragments, and scholars must decide whether they are hearing a large industry or a chorus of smaller local practices. You move toward the ships. Sailors prepare for departure, stowing jars, ropes, spare cloth, water, and preserved food. The deck smells of pine pitch, seaweed, damp wood, and old fish. A sailor tears bread and eats it with olives and salted fish before casting off. His fingers are cracked from rope and seawater. Salt dries on his skin. Salt sits in his food. Salt glitters on the rail where spray has evaporated. He is wrapped in it without thinking. The harbour grows louder as the wind rises. Oars dip. A mast creaks. A merchant argues over the count of amphorae while pretending he is calm, which fools absolutely no one. The ship pulls away, carrying preserved food, trade goods, and stories toward another port. In its hold, salt has made the sea portable. Fish caught in one place can feed mouths in another. A coast can reach inland. A poor meal can become bearable. A long voyage can last one more day. Evening settles in violet and gold. The market empties slowly. Stone still holds the day's heat under your feet. A final gull circles overhead, screaming like a critic of all civilization. You taste a crumb of bread touched with oil and salt. It is simple, bright, and complete. In the Greek world, salt is not only survival, it is commerce, conversation, seafaring, and thought. It belongs in the fisherman's hands, the philosopher's banquet, the sailor's ration, the clay jar, and the hot white pans beside the coast. It helps the Mediterranean become a connected sea, where islands and cities speak across water through trade, appetite, and preserved abundance. You set your feet on a Roman road, and the first thing you notice is how serious the stones are. They stretch ahead in a hard, pale line, fitted with that famous Roman confidence that says, yes, the world is untidy, but perhaps a straight road and enough soldiers can fix it. Your sandals strike the surface with a steady tap. Dust rises at the edges. Wild thyme grows beside the ditch, crushed now and then by passing wheels. The air smells of a warm stone, mule sweat, leather harness, olive oil, and the faint salt tang of provisions packed for travel. A column of soldiers moves past you in measured rhythm. Their shields knock softly against their bodies. Metal fittings flash in the sun. Someone coughs. Someone mutters about the weight of his pack. Someone else has clearly been muttering since dawn and may continue until retirement. The Roman army is disciplined, yes, but it is still made of human beings, and human beings rarely march without complaint. Salt walks with them. Roman soldiers needed reliable rations grain, wine or sour wine, oil, legumes, bacon, cheese, and preserved foods. Salt helped preserve meat and fish, season simple meals, and maintain bodies under physical strain. It was part of the logistical world that made Rome powerful. Armies are not only victories and eagles and dramatic speeches. Armies are supply lines. They are carts, granaries, pack animals, contracts, depots, cooks, accountants, and the eternal question of whether enough food will arrive before everyone becomes very unpleasant. You pass a roadside station where travellers rest beneath a patch of shade. A mule drinks noisily from a trough. A cook stirs a pot of beans, herbs, and salted pork. The smell is rich, smoky, and comforting after the heat of the road. Salted pork travels better than fresh meat. It can be carried to forts, camps, towns, and ships. A soldier tears bread with rough fingers and dips it into the pot. His hands are cracked, his nails dark with dust, and salt clings invisibly to his day in sweat, food, and duty. Rome did not invent salt. Of course. Rome was rarely shy about borrowing useful things and then organising them with intimidating enthusiasm. The city grew near sources of salt and trade routes that mattered early in its history. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road, connected Rome with salt-producing areas near the mouth of the Tiber and extended inland. Its precise early development is difficult to reconstruct, but its name preserves a truth salt was important enough to shape movement around the growing city. You walk through the Porta Salaria, or imagine its earlier line, and enter the life of Rome. Noise surrounds you at once. Cartwheels grind, vendors shout, water splashes from fountains, bakers slide loaves from ovens. The smell is thick bread, smoke, wool dye, fish sauce, sweat, incense, damp stone, frying oil, and animals that have not read any urban hygiene guidelines. Above the crowd, apartment blocks rise with laundry hanging from windows. Rome is magnificent, but it is also crowded, smelly, and convinced that everyone else should move aside. Salt appears in shops and homes, but also in law and administration. The Roman state cared about supplies, roads, markets, and taxes. Salt production and trade could be regulated, and in some periods the government influenced pricing or distribution. Salt was too necessary to ignore. When a substance touches every kitchen and camp, officials eventually develop forms for it. This is practically a law of civilization. There is the famous idea that Roman soldiers were paid in salt, giving us the word salary. It is a delicious story, tidy and memorable, which means you should hold it gently. The Latin word salarium is connected to salt, but scholars debate whether it originally referred to an allowance for buying salt, a general stipend, or something more complicated. Soldiers were not simply handed a little bag of crystals every payday like seasoning-based pocket money. The truth is less cute, but still revealing. Salt was important enough to leave a trace in the language of payment and value. A quirky tidbit belongs in the Roman dining room. Salt cellars could become objects of status in later elite dining traditions, and among Romans, salt had symbolic associations with hospitality, offerings, and the table. A simple dish of salt could mark the difference between rough necessity and civilized eating. Of course, Roman elites also enjoyed showing off with imported delicacies, elaborate sauces, and dinner parties where guests reclined for hours. Humanity has always known how to turn dinner into theatre, and occasionally into an endurance event. You step into a wealthy house where mosaic floors feel cool beneath your feet. A fountain murmurs in the courtyard. The air carries the scent of roses, lamp oil, wine, and garum, the fermented fish sauce beloved across the Roman world. Garum and related sauces were produced from fish, salt, and thyme. Their smell could be intense, but their flavour added savoury depth to meals. Amorphorae of these sauces travelled widely, marked by producers and origins. In a kitchen, a cook tips a little into a stew, and the whole pot changes character as salt, fish, or fermentation. Empire not exactly a bedtime candle scent, but historically persuasive. Historians still argue about how deeply salt shaped Rome's earliest expansion, compared with other forces such as land hunger, security, alliances, trade, and rivalry with neighbouring peoples. The Salt Road is real in memory and root, but it should not be treated as the single secret engine of the Roman power. Rome grew through many overlapping pressures. Still, salt gave practical support to movement, preservation, and supply, and Rome was above all a civilization skilled at turning practical support into dominance. You leave the mansion and head toward a military camp near the frontier. The mood changes, straight lines return, ditches, ramparts, tents, workshops, storehouses, and cooking fires form an ordered world on uncertain ground. The wind is colder here. It smells of wet wool, iron, smoke, trampled grass, and salted meat boiling in a cauldron. A sentry shifts his weight. In the distance, dark trees mark land Rome wants to understand tax, or avoid admitting it does not fully control. Inside a storehouse, sacks and jars are arranged carefully. There is grain for bread, salt for preservation and cooking, vinegar, oil, dried legumes, smoked meat, and hard cheese. Logistics turn conquest from a raid into occupation. Salt helps make distance manageable. It keeps food from spoiling while roads, forts, and ships connect places too far apart for fresh supplies. The empire breathed through this system port to warehouse, warehouse to cart, cart to camp, camp to soldier. Night falls over the camp. The fires glow low. Soldiers eat from wooden bowls, their voices softer now, roughened by fatigue. Someone laughs. Someone sharpens a blade with slow strokes. Someone writes a letter home, perhaps exaggerating his comfort for the sake of the reader. You taste the stew salty, smoky, plain, sustaining. It is not the food of marble statues. It is the food that keeps men walking. The Roman road outside lies pale in moonlight. Salt has travelled it in carts, sacks, rations, sauces, and language. It has seasoned city meals, supported armies, preserved supplies, and touched the idea of wages itself. In Rome, salt becomes part of the empire's hard structure, not grand enough to stand on a triumphal arch, perhaps, but present in every march, market, kitchen, and frontier storehouse. You brush a few grains from a wooden table. They catch briefly against your fingertip, dry and bright. Rome may dream in stone, law, and victory, but it survives in provisions. And among those provisions, small and stubborn, salt keeps moving. You enter the desert at dawn, when the Sahara is still cool enough to feel almost gentle. The sand under your feet is firm in places, loose in others, shifting with a soft, dry sigh. The sky is pale blue, empty and enormous. A camel bell sounds somewhere ahead, thin and patient, carried by air so clear it feels washed clean. You smell leather, wool, dust, dried grass, camel sweat, and the faint mineral dryness of salt blocks wrapped for transport. The world seems silent until you notice all the small noises: rope creaking, hooves pressing into sand, men clearing their throats, wind combing across dunes. A caravan prepares to move. The salt here does not appear as delicate grains in a bowl. It is cut in slabs, heavy and pale, sometimes grey, sometimes nearly white, rough-edged like pieces of frozen moonlight. Men load the blocks onto camels with careful balance. A single mistake can rub an animal raw or topple wealth into the sand. Salt is valuable, yes, but it is also awkward. History, as usual, refuses to make power lightweight. You walk beside traders crossing one of the great trans-Saharan routes. For centuries, salt from desert mines and deposits moves south toward the Sahel and West African kingdoms, while gold, cola nuts, leather, textiles, enslaved people, and other goods move through linked networks of exchange. Salt was especially prized in regions where local supply was limited and where hot climates made bodily need and food preservation important. The Sahara, which looks at first like a barrier becomes a vast and dangerous road. The sun rises higher. Heat spreads over your shoulders like a hand. The sand brightens until you narrow your eyes. Each camel moves with long, rolling patience, chewing as if it has privately forgiven the universe but not forgotten its flaws. The drivers wear layered cloth against sun and dust. Their faces are calm, watchful. They know wells, stars, winds, dunes, and the moods of animals. Their knowledge is as precious as the cargo, though harder to stack. At midday, the caravan halts near a well. The water is deep, cold, and faintly bitter. Buckets scrape against stone. Men drink slowly. Camels groan and fold their legs beneath them. The air smells of damp rope, animal breath, and hot mineral dust. Someone breaks a small piece from a salt slab to trade or taste. On the tongue it is sharp, intense, almost shocking after hours of dry air. Your mouth wakes. Your body understands before your thoughts do. Salt in West Africa was not merely a seasoning. It helped preserve food, supported health, and served as a valuable trade good. In some regions, salt could be exchanged at high value against gold. Though the famous phrase that salt was worth its weight in gold should be treated carefully. Prices varied by place, season, route, supply, and political conditions. Still, the pairing of Saharan salt and West African gold became one of the most famous trade relationships in world history. You approach a salt mine settlement, a place of glare, labour, and harsh beauty. The ground is pale and crusted. Men cut blocks from deposits with tools that ring against compacted mineral earth. The sound is sharp, rhythmic, and tiring just to hear. The smell is dry, dusty, and slightly bitter. Skin grows tight in the heat. Lips crack. Eyes water in the brightness. Salt dust coats robes and hands until workers seem half-made of the thing they harvest. A quirky tidbit belongs to the desert town of Takasa, remembered by medieval travellers for houses said to be built partly from blocks of salt, with roofs of camel skins or other materials. It sounds like something from a dream. A town you could season soup with if municipal planning went terribly wrong. Yet salt architecture in such environments made practical sense when stone and timber were scarce. The idea is strange only until the landscape explains itself. You sit in the shade of a low wall. The shade is thin but precious. A trader unwraps dates, hard cheese, and flat bread. The food is simple, chewy, and welcome. Salt touches the cheese, the sweat on your skin, the blocks stacked nearby, the stories passing between men. One speaks of Timbuktu, another of Walata, another of markets farther south where salt will be broken, weighed, and exchanged. The names drift like lanterns through the heat. The spread of Islam across North and West Africa gave these routes new cultural depth. Traders, scholars, pilgrims, and jurists moved along paths also used by salt caravans. Mosques, manuscript traditions, legal learning, and urban centres grew in places connected to commerce. Cities such as Timbuktu became associated with scholarship as well as trade. Salt did not create this world alone, obviously. Camels, gold, faith, rulers, water, language, and geography all had their say, but salt travelled among them, a practical mineral moving through a sacred and commercial landscape. Historians still debate how centralised control over salt routes was in different West African states. Did kings directly command the trade, tax it from strategic points, or negotiate with merchant groups whose own networks carried much of the work? The answer changes across time and place. Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Berber traders, local chiefs, desert communities, and market towns all appear in the story, but not as neat pieces on a board. Power in the desert is negotiated through wells, trust, arms, animals, weather, and patience. You join the caravan again as evening cools the sand. The light turns copper. Long shadows stretch behind the camels. The salt blocks glow softly, no longer harsh white, but warm, almost gentle. A wind rises, carrying fine grit against your cheeks. Men wrap cloth across their faces. The bells continue, slow and irregular. Above, the first stars emerge, and the caravan begins to steer by memory and sky. Night in the desert is not empty. It hums with cold air, animal breathing, low voices, and the crackle of a small fire. The smell of tea, smoke, wool, and camel tack settles around the camp. Someone recites a line of poetry. Someone checks the loads. Someone laughs quietly at a joke you do not quite catch. The salt slabs lie stacked nearby, silent as sleeping stones, but they hold the effort of mines, the danger of crossings, the hunger of markets, and the ambition of kingdoms. You lie back and look upward. The stars are startling, crowded and bright. Beneath them, salt has become desert wealth mined from dryness, carried through hardship, traded for gold, folded into faith, scholarship, and power. Each block is a piece of an ancient sea lifted into the hands of travellers. Each journey says the same thing in hoofbeats and bells what the body needs. The world will find a way to move. You arrive in a medieval salt town before sunrise, when the streets are blue with cold and the chimneys are already awake. Smoke climbs from low roofs and drifts across narrow lanes. Your breath clouds in front of you. The stones under your feet are slick with frost, mud, and the thin white dust of salt carried on boots and carts. Somewhere a bell rings, slow and hollow, calling workers toward another day of fire, water, wood, and waiting. The air smells of brine, horse dung, wet wool, ash, and bread beginning to bake in ovens that make the morning feel less cruel. The town has grown around a salty gift or a brine spring, a salt well, or mineral deposits hidden close enough to reach. Houses crowd near boiling works, storehouses stand by the road, a small church watches over everything with the patient expression of stone. Salt towns across medieval Europe often became prosperous because nearby communities depended on them for curing meat, making cheese, preserving fish, feeding livestock, and surviving winter. A good salt source could turn a remote valley or river bend into a place of tolls, guilds, rights, and suspiciously confident merchants. You step into a boiling house. The change is immediate. Heat presses against your face. Steam gathers on beams and drips back down in warm drops. Large pans of brine sit over fires, their surfaces trembling and whispering. Workers move through vapour like figures inside a cloud. Their clothes cling to them. Their hands are red from heat and salt. The sound is constant bubbling brine, snapping wood, scraping tools, coughing throats, shouted instructions softened by steam. Salt-making here demands fuel. Enormous amounts of fuel. Forests near medieval salt works could be cut heavily to feed the fires. Woodcutters, Carters, coopers, pan makers, miners, and labourers all become part of the trade. The mineral in the pan is only the visible ending of a much wider chain. A single white crystal may contain the labour of a man felling trees before dawn, a woman carrying kindling, an ox pulling a loaded cart, and a worker standing over heat until the room spins. You watch as a salt worker rakes crystals from the pan. They gather in damp, heavy clumps, not yet the clean dry grains of a table. He lifts them into a basket to drain. The smell is sharp and metallic, mixed with smoke. When you touch the rim of the wooden trough, it is warm, wet, and crusted white. Your fingertips sting where salt finds tiny cracks in the skin. A small pain, but a convincing one. Outside, the town is waking fully. A baker opens shutters. A woman carries a bucket. A monk passes with his hood low against the cold. Pigs snuffle near a gutter, performing their civic duties with enthusiasm and no shame. In the market square, salt is weighed and sold. Some buyers want fine salt. Others need coarse salt for curing. A butcher inspects a delivery with narrowed eyes, because damp salt cheats the scale. A fishmonger argues anyway, because arguing is cheaper than paying. Medieval authorities understood the value of controlling salt. Kings, bishops, abbots, dukes, towns, and local lords claimed rights over springs, pans, roads, bridges, and markets. They granted privileges, collected tolls, regulated measures, and sometimes created monopolies. Salt could support town walls, church foundations, military costs, and noble households. It was humble enough for porridge and grand enough for charters sealed in wax. A quirky tidbit hides in the names of places. Across Europe, many towns preserve salt in their names: Halle, Hellstatt, Salzburg, Salins, and others. These names often point to older salt sources or salt-working traditions. Salzburg, for instance, means something like salt fortress or salt castle. It is a wonderfully direct name, as if the town looked at itself and said, "Yes, we have salt, and we intend to be dramatic about it." You walk toward a guild hall where craft rules are discussed under dark beams. The room smells of wax, wool, smoke, and damp parchment. Salt workers and merchants may organize to protect privileges, fix standards, settle disputes, and defend local interests. Guild life is not always romantic. It can be restrictive, jealous, and deeply fond of regulations. Yet it also provides identity, training, mutual aid, and a voice in town affairs. In a world where rights are often negotiated rather than assumed, belonging to an organised body matters, historians still debate how much medieval salt wealth improved the lives of ordinary workers. Town records may show prosperity, churches, walls, and busy trade, but the people boiling brine often faced heat, injury, unstable wages, and dependence on employers or authorities. A rich salt town does not mean every hand in it grows rich. Wealth, like steam, has a habit of rising. At midday, church bells mark the hours, work pauses briefly. You eat in a small room with a low ceiling blackened by smoke. The meal is rye bread, cheese, onions, and a slice of salted pork. The bread is coarse, the cheese sharp, the pork dense and pleasing after cold streets. Salt makes the meal last beyond harvest, beyond slaughter season, beyond the short mercy of freshness. You hear spoons against bowls, tired breathing, a laugh from the corner, and wind worrying the shutters. The church calendar shapes diets too. Fasting days and restrictions on meat increase demand for preserved fish in many Christian regions. Salt keeps herring, cod, and other fish edible as they move inland. The town's brine pans are therefore connected not only to hunger, but to devotion, obligation, and the weekly rhythm of belief. Even spiritual disciplinarists, turns out, need supply chains. Very holy, very logistical. Evening settles with a reddish glow behind rooftops. The boiling houses still breathe steam. Cartwheels leave tracks in slush. A guard checks a storehouse door. In a home nearby, a woman packs meat into salt for winter, pressing firmly with cold fingers. Her room smells of smoke, herbs, and raw wood. The work is ordinary, intimate, and serious. You stand in the square as snow begins to fall lightly, melting where it lands near warm drains from the salt works. The town is not silent. It murmurs with labour, prayer, bargaining, resentment, pride, and the endless hiss of brine becoming crystals. Here, salt has become a medieval engine heating houses, thinning forests, filling ledgers, feeding workers, enriching towns, and giving names to places that still remember the mineral beneath their streets. The bells fade into the cold. The white crystals cool in baskets, waiting for roads, kitchens, monasteries, markets, and winter cellars. You glide into Venice on water the colour of pewter and pearl. The boat moves softly through the lagoon, its wooden sides creaking as the oar dips and turns. Morning mist hangs low over the channels. Bells sound from somewhere unseen, their notes spreading across the water like rings. The air smells of brine, damp stone, seaweed, tar, fish, smoke, and old wood soaked by tides. Beneath you, the lagoon shifts and breathes, neither land nor sea, a half-hidden world of mud flats, reeds, salt marshes, birds, and glittering shallows. Venice rises from this watery uncertainty as if it has decided that solid ground is a suggestion, not a requirement. You see houses crowded along canals, their lower stones dark with moisture. Narrow bridges arch from one island to another. Boats slide past carrying vegetables, timber, cloth, barrels, baskets, and voices. A man rows standing up with relaxed precision, looking as if gravity has made a personal agreement with him. The city is busy, damp, graceful, and faintly impossible, and beneath much of its early power lies salt. The Venetian lagoon offered places where seawater could be trapped, guided, and evaporated. Salt pans in and around lagoon environments produced crystals that became crucial to local survival and trade. Venice was not simply a beautiful city of masks, paintings, and later tourists wandering in circles. It was a commercial machine, and salt was one of its early gears. Control of salt helped Venice feed itself, trade with neighbours, build influence, and develop the habits of regulation that marked its political life. You step from the boat onto a damp wooden landing. The planks feel slick under your feet. Nearby, workers carry baskets towards storage sheds. Their sleeves are rolled. Their hands are reddened by brine. In the distance, beyond the denser buildings, shallow salt ponds gleam under a clearing sky. Low banks divide the pans. Water stands in sheets, reflecting clouds and birds. As sun and wind do their slow work, salt gathers at the bottom, then along edges, then in harvestable crusts. The process depends on patience and timing. Too much rain, and the brine weakens. Too little care, and impurities spoil the harvest. Workers rake crystals, pile them, drain them, and move them into storage. You hear wooden tools scraping against salt beds, gulls crying overhead, and wet footsteps sucking at the mud. The smell is bright and tidal. The atmosphere is open, exposed, and strangely calm, even though everyone knows the weather can ruin a season with the casual arrogance of weather everywhere. Venice's rulers understood that salt was too important to leave entirely loose in private hands. The city developed systems to regulate salt trade, prices, transport, and taxation. Over time, salt revenue helped support public finance and maritime expansion. The Venetian state could use commercial privilege and diplomatic pressure to secure salt supplies and markets. It bought, sold, stored, taxed, and directed salt with the careful attention of a republic that knew profit had to be organised before it could become power. You enter an office where clerks sit with ledgers, seals, and ink. The room smells of parchment, wax, damp wool, and the faint sourness of canal water drifting through the shutters. A clerk writes figures in a steady hand. He records quantities, destinations, obligations, and payments. Outside, bells, boat calls, and market noise drift through the walls. Inside, salt becomes numbers. The crystals may be white and silent, but the paperwork around them is very much awake. A quirky tidbit lies in Venice's talent for turning geography into policy. The lagoon protected the city from some land-based enemies, yet it also forced Venice to rely on boats, trade, and careful supply management. Salt fit this watery personality perfectly. It came from sun, sea, and mud, then moved by boat through channels and across the Adriatic. Venice did not conquer by farmland in the usual way at first. It learned to rule through routes, contracts, ships, warehouses, and nerves of astonishingly calm merchants. You walk into the Rialto market as the day grows louder. Fish lie on tables packed with crushed ice in later centuries, or shaded and hurried in earlier ones. Herbs, onions, fruit, spices, cloth, and glass crowd the stalls. The smell is a wild mixture of brine, eel, citrus peel, wet rope, pepper, smoke, and human impatience. Merchants from different shores bargain in many tongues: Greek, Latin, Venetian dialects, Arabic, Slavic speech, and Germanic voices may brush against one another in the city's long commercial life. Salt belongs among these languages, because goods teach people to speak across distance. Even when they would rather win the argument, Venice also used salt as diplomacy. Controlling supply meant negotiating with nearby mainland towns, rival producers, and maritime partners. Salt could bind communities into dependence or provoke resentment when prices and privileges felt unfair. A city that controls a necessary commodity gains leverage, but also enemies. This is the small print of power, and it is always written somewhere, even when no one reads it aloud. Historians still argue how decisive salt was in Venice's rise compared with shipbuilding, banking, geography, trade and luxury goods, crusading opportunities, and political stability. Salt alone did not build the Republic. No crystal, however confident, can raise fleets by itself. Yet salt gave Venice early income, practical reach, and experience in managing essential trade. It trained the city in the arts of monopoly, transport, accounting, and strategic patience. You sit near a canal at dusk. The stone ledge is cool and damp beneath your palm. Water laps softly below. A boat passes with a lantern at its bow, light trembling over the black surface. Somewhere behind you, a kitchen prepares fish with salt, oil, and herbs. The smell drifts out warmly into the evening. A sailor laughs. A merchant closes his shutters. A clerk sands a page to dry the ink. In a warehouse, salt rests in heaps or containers, pale in the dimness, waiting to be loaded again. The lagoon darkens to silver. Buildings seem to float. The city listens to itself through water oar strokes, bells, footsteps, murmurs, gulls settling for the night. Venice teaches salt to become maritime strategy. It is not only harvested from shallow pans, it is managed, taxed, shipped, protected, and used to weave a city of mud and ambition into the trade of seas. You breathe in brine and lamp smoke. The crystals here taste of tide and law, of sun on shallow water, of ledgers in damp rooms, of ships leaving at dawn. Venice is beautiful, yes, but not delicate. It is built on stakes, commerce, salt, and nerve. Very romantic, if your idea of romance includes accounting, and perhaps, in history, it often should. You stand on a northern quay where the morning is cold enough to make every breath visible. The harbour is busy before the sun has fully climbed. Boats rock against wooden pilings. Nets lie in wet heaps. Barrels stand open, waiting. The planks beneath your feet are slick with seawater and fish scales, and the air smells of brine, tar, smoke, wet wool, and herring so determined in its presence that no one could honestly call it subtle. Gulls wheel overhead, screaming like unpaid officials. Men and women work quickly because fish do not wait. The catch is hauled in, sorted, gutted, washed, salted, and packed. Hands redden in the cold. Knives flash in grey light. Salt is thrown in layers, white over silver, silver over white, until the barrels become small chambers of preservation. The sound is steady and rough fish hitting boards, hoops hammered tight, voices calling weights, prices, and warnings to mind your fingers. This is one of the great food systems of medieval and early modern Europe. Salted fish, especially herring in the North Sea and Baltic worlds, and cod from colder Atlantic waters, feeds towns, monasteries, ships, armies, and inland markets. It carries the sea into regions far from the shore. It changes the rhythm of trade and the calendar of eating. Christian fasting rules help shape the demand. Across much of medieval Europe, there are many days when meat from land animals is restricted or avoided. The exact rules vary by time, place, status, and interpretation, because nothing involving food, religion, and human discipline remains simple for long. Fish becomes a practical answer. Salt makes that answer transportable. Without preservation, a fasting day in an inland town would depend on very ambitious fish and impossible timing. You walk into a market square miles from the coast. It is not yet noon, but the place is already crowded. A cart has arrived with barrels of salted herring. The smell escapes as soon as the lid is lifted sharp, oily, clean in one breath and aggressive in the next. A woman inspects the fish with narrowed eyes. A monk counts coins. A cook from a noble household asks about quality. A poor labourer buys only a small portion, wrapped carefully, because even humble protein has a price. The fish is not glamorous. It is practical, salty, sometimes tough, sometimes delicious, sometimes a test of personal optimism. It can be soaked to remove excess salt, then cooked with onions, grains, herbs, or vinegar. It can stretch a meal. It can keep a household going. It can feed workers through winter and sailors across dangerous water. Salted cod opens wider horizons. In cold northern seas, cod can be split and dried in wind, becoming stockfish, especially in places like Norway and Iceland. When salt is added more heavily, cod becomes even more durable and adaptable to trade. Over time, Atlantic fishing grounds become economically important to European powers. The sea is not just a blue surface on a map. It is a pantry, a battlefield, a workplace, and a place where men vanish if weather turns unkind. You join fishermen preparing for a voyage. The boat smells of pitch, damp rope, smoke, stale bread, and old salt. The deck is hard beneath your hands. Waves slap the hull with patient insistence. Men load barrels, lines, hooks, spare clothing, and food. Their faces are weathered by wind and spray. One man tucks a small charm beneath his shirt. Another checks the sky with the irritated respect sailors reserve for weather, which has never cared about anyone's plans. Fishing voyages require preservation aboard ship or rapid processing ashore. Salt extends the distance between catch and market. It allows fleets to exploit rich waters and return with food that can still be sold. It also encourages specialized labor coopers to make barrels. Salt suppliers, merchants, ship owners, net makers, porters, women who gut and pack fish, clerks who count, and officials who tax. The fish on a plate carries an entire community behind it, though the diner mostly asks whether there is enough vinegar. A quirky tidbit swims through this salty world. Medieval people sometimes distinguished carefully between different kinds, sizes, and preparations of herring, with trade rules that could become impressively detailed. Barrels had to meet standards, fish had to be packed correctly. Bad curing could ruin cargo and reputation. A dishonest seller might try to hide poor fish beneath better layers, which proves again that human creativity has always had both noble and suspicious uses. You step inside a cooper's workshop. It smells of fresh wood shavings, iron hoops, smoke, and fish brine soaked into old staves. The cooper bends wooden strips into shape, fitting them into a barrel that must hold salt, liquid, and fish without leaking. His tools knock and scrape in a rhythm almost gentle. Barrels are humble technology, but they are essential. Without them, the preserved fish trade becomes much messier, and history already has enough mess. Historians still argue how much fish and salt helped push Europeans into the wider Atlantic. Some emphasize demand for preserved fish, fasting rules, and expanding markets as major motives for long-distance voyages. Others point to many overlapping pressures: trade competition, ship technology, climate, population, politics, and the search for new routes and resources. Salted fish is not the whole story, but it is a strong current beneath the surface. You feel that current in a coastal town whose wealth depends on the catch. Warehouses line the harbour, church bells ring over roofs silvered with damp, Women carry baskets with quick, balanced steps. Children gather scraps near the cleaning tables. Cats move with professional interest. The stones are cold through your soles. The taste of salt seems to settle everywhere, on lips, sleeves, doorframes, and dreams. At a monastery table, the mood is quieter. The room smells of wax, wool, bread, beans, and fish soaked and cooked for the day's meal. Wooden spoons move through bowls. A monk eats in silence, though his expression suggests he may be having private thoughts about culinary repetition. Salted fish supports religious discipline, but it does not always inspire joy. Still, it nourishes. It satisfies rule and body at once, which is no small achievement. Beyond the monastery, beyond the town, beyond the harbour, the ocean waits. Its cold waters hold vast shoals that shimmer and turn as one body. Nets descend, lines pull tight, salt waits in barrels on shore, ready to change fragile abundance into a commodity that can cross mountains, borders, and seasons. Evening comes with fog. The harbour lamps glow soft and blurred. Workers roll sealed barrels into storage. The wood is damp beneath your palm. Inside, layers of fish and salt rest in darkness, slowly becoming durable. Somewhere inland, a family will open a barrel in winter. Somewhere at sea, a sailor will chew a hard piece of fish and keep working. Somewhere in a fasting kitchen, a cook will sigh and make the best of it. Salt has joined the sea to the calendar. It has turned religious rule into trade, fish into wealth, ports into power, and cold water into distant meals. The mineral does not preach, sail, or cast nets. It simply preserves what human hunger has learned to chase. You step onto the deck of a ship preparing for a long voyage, and the first thing you feel is motion. Even tied to the harbour, the vessel shifts beneath your feet, rising and settling with the tide as if it is breathing in its sleep. Ropes strain softly, wood creaks, water knocks against the hull. The air smells of tar, wet oak, bilge water, smoke from the shore, stale beer, damp wool, and salted meat packed in barrels for weeks of uneasy eating. A gull lands on a post nearby and watches everyone work with the judgmental calm of a small feathered tax collector. Men carry provisions aboard, barrels of beef and pork, hard biscuit, peas, oatmeal, cheese, butter, vinegar, beer or water, depending on the voyage and the moment. Salted fish, more salted meat, more barrels, always more barrels. A ship at sea is not only sails and courage, it is a floating pantry with a mast, and that pantry must survive damp, rats, heat, storms, leaks, and cooks who are doing their best under conditions that would make any modern kitchen inspector quietly leave the profession. Salt is central to this world because it keeps food edible long enough for distance. In the age of long ocean voyages, European expansion depends on preservation. Ships travel along African coasts, across the Atlantic, around the Cape of Good Hope, into the Indian Ocean, and across routes already known and navigated by many other peoples. Sailors need durable food, and salt helps make that possible. Salted meat and fish do not make life pleasant. Exactly. They make life possible. There is a difference. And any sailor chewing leathery beef in the dark understands it very well. You watch a cooper seal a barrel of salted pork. The hoops are hammered tight with dull, ringing blows. Inside, meat lies layered with salt or packed in brine. The smell is heavy, animal, sharp, and sour around the edges. The salt draws moisture out and slows decay, though not perfectly. Barrels can leak, meat can spoil, worms can appear, brine can turn foul. The sea is not kind to provisions. It is wet, warm in some latitudes, freezing in others, and always ready to turn small mistakes into large misery. A sailor lifts a piece of salt beef from an older barrel and makes a face. It is stiff, greyish, and strong-smelling. He jokes that it may have known his grandfather personally. The others laugh, because laughter is cheaper than better food. They soak it, boil it, and hope. Salt preserves, but it does not restore tenderness, as manners or optimism. Still, the system works well enough to carry people across oceans. Preserved food supports naval warfare, merchant shipping, fishing fleets, exploration, and colonial settlement. European empires do not expand on ambition alone. They expand on logistics, and logistics taste very often of salt. Behind every mapmaker's line and royal claim is someone counting barrels and wondering whether the pork will last. You move below deck. The air is close and dim. Beams press low overhead. Water seeps somewhere in the dark. The smell is thick bilge, tar, mould, unwashed bodies, salt meat, rope, and fear hidden under routine. Barrels are lashed in place. Rats scratch behind boards. A lantern swings, casting gold light over stacked supplies. You touch a barrel side. It feels damp and slightly sticky, with salt crystals drying near the seams. The social history of preserved food is not gentle. Sailors often endure monotonous diets, harsh discipline, low pay, disease, injury, and danger. Salt meat fills the stomach, but it also reminds them of distance from fresh fields and home kitchens. Fresh vegetables and fruits are rare on many voyages, which contributes to scurvy until its causes and prevention are better understood. Salt keeps meat from rotting, but it cannot provide everything the body needs. A barrel can be full and still leave a person lacking. A quirky tidbit lives in the rituals of naval provisioning sailors, sometimes called heavily salted beef by grim nicknames, mocking its hardness, age, or mysterious origin. Some stories joke that old salt horse, meaning preserved beef, was so tough it seemed less like food than a piece of equipment. This is not fine dining. This is survival with sarcasm, which is one of humanity's older seasonings. On shore, salt also helps build colonial economies. Curing fish in Newfoundland and other Atlantic fisheries creates products that can be shipped to Europe, the Caribbean, and Mediterranean markets. Salted cod becomes a staple of trade, feeding workers, enslaved people, sailors, soldiers, and ordinary households. The fishery links cold northern waters to plantation economies in warmer colonies, a connection both practical and morally dark. Salt preserves food, but it also preserves the routines of unequal systems, allowing ships and labour regimes to continue across distance. You stand in a Caribbean port under a bright, heavy sun. The air smells of molasses, saltfish, smoke, sweat, sugar cane, and sea rot. Barrels move from ships to warehouses. Salt cod, salted meat, and other preserved foods feed populations drawn into colonial labour systems, including enslaved Africans forced to work plantations. The food is often cheap, durable, and rationed. It is nourishment shaped by power. The taste of salt here is not romantic. It is tied to coercion, commerce, and the harsh arithmetic of empire. Historians still debate how to weigh salt's role in maritime expansion against other technologies and motives and navigational instruments. Ship design, gunpowder weapons, finance, religion, competition, forced labour, and the hunger for spices, silver, land, and profit. Salt did not launch ships by itself, yet without preserved food, long voyages become far more difficult. Salt is one of the quiet supports beneath the loud history of conquest. You return to the ship at sea. Days have blurred. The horizon is a perfect circle, which is beautiful for about an hour and then possibly rude. Waves lift and drop the hull. Wind fills the sails with a deep, living sound. Salt spray dries on your face and lips. Your shirt is stiff at the collar. The cook serves a meal in wooden bowls, boiled peas, hard biscuit, and a chunk of salted meat softened by long cooking but still stubborn. It tastes powerful, smoky, briny, and tired. Men eat in silence at first. Then talk begins. One speaks of home. One curses the captain under his breath. One claims he can smell land, which everyone doubts but secretly hopes is true. Their bodies are carried by salt in several forms: sea outside, sweat on skin, meat in the bowl, fish in the barrel, and mineral crystals hidden in every ration. Night falls over open water. The deck cools. Stars tremble above the mast. The ship creaks like an old house dreaming of storms. In the hold, salted provisions wait in darkness, doing their slow, imperfect work. They are not glorious. They are often disliked. They are sometimes dangerous when spoiled, yet they make distance livable. Salt, in the age of voyages, becomes endurance. It keeps armies fed across seas, sailors alive through weeks of horizon, colonies supplied, fisheries profitable, and empires connected by barrels that smell frankly terrible. The mineral that once glittered in shallow pans now sits in the damp belly of ships, helping humans cross oceans with courage, greed, hunger, hope, and a great deal of chewy beef. You enter a kitchen where politics is hiding in a small wooden box. The room is dim, smoky, and warm from the hearth. A pot hangs over low flames, giving off the smell of cabbage, onions, beans, and a little strip of pork that has been asked to do far more work than one strip of pork should reasonably manage. The floor is packed earth, cool beneath your feet. A child sits near the fire, rubbing sleep from their eyes. A woman reaches toward the salt box, opens it, and pauses. There is not much inside. She pinches only a little between finger and thumb, then lets it fall into the pot like something precious. The grains vanish at once. No trumpet sounds, no king appears in the doorway, yet the gesture carries the weight of law, tax, hunger, resentment, and power. When governments control salt, the kitchen becomes political whether anyone invited politics to dinner or not. Salt taxes are among the most hated forms of taxation in history because they touch everyone. Rich households grumble and pay. Poor households feel the cost in every meal, every preserved fish, every piece of cheese, every slaughtered pig that must last through winter. A tax on luxury can be avoided by skipping the luxury. A tax on salt follows the spoon. You walk out into a village street in France under a grey morning sky. Mud sucks at wooden shoes. Smoke drifts low between cottages. Chickens peck near a cartwheel. The air smells of wet straw, dung, ash, and sour wine. In this world, the gabelle, French salt tax, becomes infamous. It changes over time and varies by region, but its burden can be heavy and deeply uneven. Some provinces pay high rates, others enjoy exemptions or lower prices. The unfairness matters almost as much as the tax itself. Nothing nourishes anger like knowing the next village pays less for the same necessity. A tax officer arrives with papers, seals, and the expression of someone who has never been welcomed into a room by applause. He checks quantities and asks questions. Households may be required to buy a set amount of official salt from state-controlled stores, sometimes at inflated prices. This salt is not always meant for all uses, which makes everything even more charmingly irritating. People need salt for food, animals, butter, cheese, meat, and fish. But the law may divide legal from illegal salt with great seriousness and very little sympathy. You follow a man along a narrow path at dusk. He carries a hidden packet beneath his coat. The night air smells of damp leaves and cold earth. Owls call from the trees. He moves carefully because he is smuggling salt. Contraband salt, often called false salt in the French context, becomes a dangerous trade. Smugglers cross boundaries between tax zones, carrying cheaper salt into expensive regions. Some are organised bands, some are desperate villagers, some are opportunists who understand that when the law makes necessity expensive, necessity learns to travel quietly. Punishments can be severe fines, imprisonment, forced labour, even harsh public penalties in some periods. The state treats salt smuggling as an attack on revenue. The smuggler treats revenue as an attack on supper. History sits between them, sighing. A quirky tidbit from this world is the salt officer's almost theatrical unpopularity. In some regions, agents responsible for enforcing the tax were mocked, feared, avoided, and sometimes attacked. Their job required searching, measuring, suspecting, and intruding. Imagine becoming the person whose arrival makes every grandmother hide the seasoning. That is not a path to local affection. You enter an official salt store. The air is cool and dry. Salt lies in measured heaps or containers. The floor is dusty white. A clerk writes in a ledger while customers wait with tight faces. The smell is mineral and stale, mixed with wool cloaks damp from rain. A poor woman pays for her required portion, counting coins slowly. Her mouth is set hard. She does not shout. She does not need to. Silence can hold a full rebellion before anyone raises a banner. Salt taxes exist beyond France. States in many parts of the world discover that essential goods make reliable revenue. Governments tax salt, monopolize it, regulate its sale, or restrict production. China does it on a vast scale. European kingdoms do it in different ways. Local lords and city governments collect tolls. The logic is always similar: people need salt. So salt can pay for armies, courts, roads, debts, palaces, officials, and occasionally more officials to supervise the first officials. Very efficient, if one is not the person at the bottom. Yet salt taxes also expose the moral weakness of distant power. A ruler may see stable income. A villager sees a pot without enough flavour, meat spoiling faster, cheese harder to make, and winter made more uncertain. The tax is not abstract when it sits in a spoon. Historians still argue how directly salt taxes helped cause revolts, compared with broader pressures such as harvest failures, war debts, class resentment, legal inequality, and rising political expectations. In France, the gabelle became one symbol among many of royal injustice before the Revolution. It was not the only grievance, but it was beautifully hated because everyone understood it. You did not need a lawyer to explain why overpriced salt was infuriating. You only needed a tongue. You walk through a town where rumours move faster than carts. A crowd gathers near a market cross. Voices rise, rough and anxious. Bread prices are high. Taxes feel endless. Officials are distrusted. Someone mentions salt. Another spits on the ground. The mood is not yet violence, but it is no longer patience. You can feel the air tighten, like cloth pulled too hard across a frame. In a nearby home, a family prepares pork for curing. The meat lies on a table, pink and cold. Salt should cover it thickly, drawing out moisture, guarding it for months. But salt is expensive. The family uses less than they know they should. The room smells of raw meat, smoke, garlic, and worry. A father presses salt into the cuts, trying to stretch every handful. A grandmother watches and says nothing. Her silence is experience. Taxation changes behaviour. People economise, they smuggle, they bribe, they complain. They invent workarounds. They resent neighbours with privileges. They learn the geography of loopholes. They pass anger from one generation to another, packed as carefully as meat in a barrel. Night settles over the village. Rain taps softly on the roof. The stew is served in wooden bowls. It is warm, filling, and just salty enough to remind everyone that it could have been better. The child eats sleepily. The woman closes the salt box and places it high on a shelf. Her fingers linger on the lid. Outside, the road glistens. Somewhere, a smuggler moves through wet fields. Somewhere, a clerk totals revenue. Somewhere, a minister praises fiscal order. Somewhere, a household counts coins and tastes the state in its soup. Salt has become grievance. Not the loud kind at first, not the kind painted on flags, but the daily kind that enters blood quietly. It teaches people that power can reach the table. It shows how a mineral needed by every body can become a measure of inequality. In the white grains, you feel law, hunger, cleverness, fear, and the first bitter flavour of revolt. You walk toward the sea in the soft grey light before sunrise. The road is dusty beneath your feet, still cool from the night. A faint breeze moves through palm leaves and dry grass. Somewhere, a rooster calls. Somewhere else. A village wakes with the clink of metal pots, the splash of water, the cough of a cooking fire coming alive. The air smells of earth, smoke, cow dung fuel, cotton cloth rolled, and distant salt carried invisibly from the coast. Around you, people gather quietly, tying sandals, adjusting shawls, filling water vessels, and looking toward the path ahead. This is India under British rule, and salt has become a question of freedom. You join a small group walking with Mohandas Gandhi in 1930. The march begins from Sabarmati Ashram and heads toward the coastal village of Dandi. It is not a fast march. It is not meant to be. Each step is visible, deliberate, and almost stubbornly calm. That is part of its power. The British colonial government controls the production and sale of salt, and Indians are legally required to buy taxed salt rather than freely making their own from seawater. A mineral that every person needs has been wrapped in imperial law. The road lengthens under the sun. Feet raise dust. Cotton khadi brushes against skin, rough and light. The marchers pass fields, wells, banyan trees, and villages where crowds wait in growing numbers. Women bring water. Children stare. Old men fold their hands in greeting. Some people walk only a little way. Others continue for miles. The sound is not like an army. It is softer sandals, murmurs, birds, the occasional cough, the creak of a bullock cart, and the low human hum of expectation. Salt is brilliant as a symbol because it is so ordinary. It belongs to rich and poor, Hindu and Muslim, farmer and lawyer, fisher and clerk, child and elder. It is not an abstract constitutional clause, however important such clauses may be. It is the taste in lentils, the pinch in rice, the mineral lost in sweat, the necessity in pickles, chutneys, and preserved foods. When Gandhi chooses salt, he chooses something small enough to fit in a palm and large enough to expose an empire. You feel the heat increase as the day advances. The road grows harsh. Dust sticks to damp skin. The smell of bodies, cotton, earth, and sun-warmed cattle rises around you. At resting places, people sit beneath trees and drink water slowly. Gandhi speaks in a gentle voice, and listeners lean in. The campaign is built around satyagraha, the force of truth and non-violent resistance. It asks people to disobey unjust law openly and accept punishment without retaliation. Calm, yes. Easy, absolutely not. A quirky tidbit lives in the visual simplicity of the act at Dandi. After walking around 240 miles, Gandhi reaches the shore and picks up salty mud or makes salt from the coast, breaking the law with a gesture so plain it almost seems too small for history. No cannon, no throne, no dramatic sword, just an elderly man, a speech, and a mineral crust. Empires do dislike being embarrassed by symbolism. It makes the uniforms feel overdressed. You arrive at the coast. The Arabian Sea spreads before you, grey-blue in the morning, breathing in long, shallow waves. The sand is damp and cool underfoot. The air tastes of brine. Seabirds call overhead. People crowd near the water, quiet at first, then murmuring as the moment approaches. Gandhi bends toward the ground and lifts what the law has forbidden Indians to take freely. The gesture is small, but the atmosphere changes. You can feel it, like a thread pulled tight through thousands of bodies. Across India, people begin making salt, selling illegal salt, buying it, marching, gathering ref, and courting arrest. The protest spreads far beyond one shore. Women participate in large numbers, often stepping into public activism with salt as a shared cause. Students, workers, peasants, merchants, and political organisers join in different ways. The Salt March becomes one of the defining acts of the Indian independence movement, not because it defeats the empire immediately, but because it makes injustice visible in the language of daily life. You move into a coastal village where people boil seawater in pans. Smoke rises in thin columns. The smell is briny, hot, and smoky, blending with coconut, fish, and damp rope. Hands lift crystals from evaporated water. The salt is coarse and irregular. It is not merely seasoning now. It is civil disobedience. Each grain carries risk. Police may arrive, arrests may follow, beatings may happen at protests. Jail may wait. The courage here is not loud. It is in the choice to continue. Historians still debate how much the Salt March directly changed British policy, compared with its broader symbolic and political effects. Some emphasise that the salt tax itself remained for a time, and that independence came only after many more struggles, negotiations, crises, and sacrifices. Others see the march as a turning point that drew global attention, widened mass participation, and revealed the moral weakness of colonial rule. Both views can stand together. History often moves not by one door opening, but by many hinges loosening. You sit in the shade with a family eating a simple meal. Rice, lentils, vegetables, and a little salt. The food is warm in your hands. The salt is modest, but suddenly it seems enormous. A grandmother touches the edge of the bowl and says that no government should own the taste of survival. Her voice is low, nearly swallowed by the wind. but it lands with the certainty of something known in the bones. The British state, from its own view, sees law, order, revenue, and authority. The protesters see a foreign power taxing a necessity drawn from their own sea. This contrast gives the campaign its clarity. A law may be written neatly in official language, stamped and filed, but when it reaches into a poor household salt pot, its moral shape becomes easier to see. Evening settles over the shore, the sand cools, fires glow, waves fold and unfold in the dark with a soft continuous hush. People speak quietly of arrests, plans, courage, fear, and hope. Some are excited, some are anxious, some simply look tired. Resistance, like salt making, is work. It requires repetition, patience, heat, waiting, and the willingness to gather what appears only after much has evaporated. You hold a few rough crystals gathered from the coast. They scratch lightly against your palm. They smell faintly of smoke and sea. In them, the old history of salt changes shape again. The mineral that once funded states now challenges one. The thing taxed by empire becomes a tool against empire. It is still small, still white, still quick to dissolve, but now it carries footsteps, prayer, law-breaking, and the calm thunder of people choosing dignity. The waves continue in the darkness, washing the shore where a handful of salt became a nation's whisper made visible. You descend into the earth, and the air changes before the light does. At first there's only a sloping passage, timber supports, lantern glow, and the hollow rhythm of boots on packed ground. Then the smell shifts. The damp scent of the surface fades behind you, replaced by stone, dust, sweat, lamp smoke, and a dry mineral sharpness that seems to settle on the tongue. The walls glimmer where light touches them, not with gold, not with jewels, but with salt locked in a rock, pale and ancient, waiting beneath human feet. The mine is cool against your skin. Water drips somewhere in the darkness, each drop sounding larger than it should. Men move with picks, wedges, baskets, sledges, and lamps. The tools strike the wall with ringing blows. Salt breaks away in hard chunks. It is carried, dragged, lifted, sorted, and sent upward. The work is heavy and repetitive. Shoulders bend, hands crack, dust clings to eyelashes. If anyone imagined salt mining as a peaceful stroll through a sparkling cave, the mine corrects that fantasy at once, with a pickaxe and a saw back. Rock salt deposits are the remains of ancient seas and lakes that evaporated millions of years ago. Layers of salt were buried by sediment, pressed by time, and folded into the earth. Later humans found them by chance, by surface clues, by brine springs, or by digging deeper than comfort recommended. Mines in places such as Hallstatt, Wieliczka, and other European salt regions became famous centres of labour, wealth, and technical skill. Underground salt could be cut in great blocks. Unlike sea salt coaxed from water by sun or fire, you touch the wall. It feels cold, smooth in places, rough in others, faintly gritty under your fingers. If you lick a fingertip, the taste is immediate and bright, almost shocking in the stale underground air. Above, towns may prosper. Below, workers carve wealth out of darkness. In earlier centuries, Artesia's salt mines are lit by flame, guided by local knowledge, and shaped by danger. Roofs can collapse, water can flood tunnels, air can foul, tools can slip, yet miners learn the underground geography. They build supports, carve chambers, move loads on sledges or carts, and create working worlds beneath the visible town. Some mines become almost cities under the earth, with chapels, storage spaces, and routes known by memory. It is a strange thought, people praying underground inside the mineral that preserves food above. A quirky tidbit belongs to the Wieliczka salt mine in Poland, where miners carve chapels and statues, and even chandeliers from salt. The idea sounds like an overcommitted wedding planner found a geology problem and refused to stop. Yet it reflects a real culture of mining, devotion, and craft. In the dim underground, salt becomes not only commodity, but architecture, artwork, and sacred space. A crystal can season soup. It can also hold a saint's face in lamplight. History enjoys these surprises. You leave the mine and step into a different kind of salt world, the factory. The air is louder here, hotter, sharper. Steam pipes hiss, iron tanks hum. Coal smoke thickens the sky outside. Workers move between vats, furnaces, pumps, carts, and storage bins. The smell is chemical, metallic, smoky, and briny all at once. Your hands feel slightly damp from vapour, then dry where salt dust settles. By the industrial age, salt is no longer only a food preservative or tax source. It becomes a raw material for chemical transformation. Common salt, sodium chloride, feeds the production of soda ash, chlorine, caustic soda, and other chemicals. These substances help make glass, soap, paper, textiles, detergents, disinfectants, and many industrial products. The story of salt expands from kitchen and storehouse into laboratories, factories, and global manufacturing. A mineral once scraped from flats now enters machines, pipes, reactions, and supply chains so complex that no single worker sees the whole. You stand near a furnace where soda ash production supports glass making. Heat beats against your face. Sand, limestone, and soda come together in glowing transformation. Glass emerges from chemistry and fire, transparent and fragile, yet essential to windows, bottles, lenses, instruments, and later modern life. Salt is not visible in the finished window, but it is part of the chain that makes such material worlds possible. It has become hidden infrastructure. In another works, brine is processed through electrolysis. Electricity passes through salt solution, producing chlorine, hydrogen, and caustic soda. The process grows especially important from the 19th century onward. Chlorine becomes useful for bleaching textiles and paper, and later for disinfecting water. Caustic soda serves soap, paper, textiles, and many chemical industries. The smell near chlorine production is biting and dangerous. It catches the throat. Workers learn caution. Though industry has not always been generous with safety, the mainstream fact is clear. Industrial chemistry greatly increased salt's importance beyond food. The mineral became a foundation for modern chemical industries. Its value no longer depended only on taste or preservation. It fed the materials that filled homes, hospitals, workshops, cities, and factories. Historians still argue how to balance the benefits of salt-based chemical industries against their social and environmental costs. Industrial alkali and chlorine production supported cleaner water, cheaper soap, glass, textiles, and many useful goods. Yet factories could poison air and rivers, injure workers, and concentrate wealth in ways that left labouring communities with smoke, illness, and low wages. Progress, very often, arrives carrying both a lamp and a bill. You enter a worker's neighbourhood near a salt and chemical plant. Brick houses stand close together. Laundry hangs grey in smoky air. The street smells of coal soot, boiled cabbage, damp wool, and factory residue. Children play near puddles with the mysterious courage of children everywhere. A woman shakes salt onto potatoes at a table by the window. Her husband works at the plant where salt becomes chemicals. The same mineral sits in the family meal and in the factory wage. It feeds and employs. It also darkens the sky above them. The touch of industrial salt is everywhere. In soap used to scrub hands raw after a shift. In glass panes rattling in small windows. In bleached cloth hanging in shop fronts. In paper ledgers recording wages and debts. In disinfectants that change public health. In pipes carrying treated water. The crystal has dissolved into modernity so thoroughly that people stop seeing it. That is one of power's favourite tricks become ordinary. You walk along a canal where barges carry salt, coal, limestone, and finished chemicals. Water slaps against wooden sides. Horses pull from the towpath, their breath steaming in cold air. The canal smells of mud, oil, smoke, and mineral cargo. Railways later speed the movement, turning local resources into national and international industry. Salt moves in bulk, now, not as precious handfuls, but as tons. The scale changes the imagination. What once filled a pouch now fills ships. Evening falls over the industrial town. Factory windows glow orange. Chimneys breathe into a darkening sky. A whistle sounds, long and tired. Workers pour through gates, boots heavy, faces pale with dust and fatigue. In the mine, in the pan house, in the chemical plant, salt demands bodies. It rewards societies with preservation, glass, soap, water treatment, paper, and manufacturing. But the work itself has weight, and that weight settles on shoulders before it appears in ledgers. You hold a lump of rock salt under lamplight. Tiny planes inside it catch the glow. It looks simple, but its story has deepened. It is no longer only a grain in food or a block on a caravan. It is geology, mining, industry, chemistry, labour, pollution, wages, invention, and danger. It is ancient sea-turned-factory feedstock. It is the Earth's memory broken loose and poured into modern life. The mine grows quiet behind you. The factory hum continues ahead. Between them, salt becomes the mineral bridge from hand labour to chemical age, carrying with it the old taste of necessity and the newer scent of smoke, steam, and change. You sit at a table where salt has become a matter of science, argument, and very personal opinion. The room is bright with the morning light. A kettle murmurs on the stove. Bread rests under a cloth. A bowl of soup steams gently, carrying the smell of vegetables, chicken bones, herbs, and that unmistakable warmth that makes people lean closer before they mean to. Beside the bowl sits a small salt shaker, modest and almost innocent. It looks far too simple for the amount of debate gathered around it. You reach for it, then pause. By the modern age, salt is no longer only a preservative, a tax, a trade good, or a raw material. It has entered the language of health. Doctors, chemists, public officials, food companies, cooks, parents, athletes, and mildly dramatic dinner companions all have something to say. Too little salt can harm the body. Too much can also cause trouble. The mineral remains necessary, but necessity has become a balancing act. Your body uses sodium to help regulate fluid balance, nerve signals, and muscle function. Chloride helps maintain fluid balance and supports stomach acid. These facts are now taught in classrooms and clinics, but for most of human history, people understood them through sensation, thirst, weakness, craving, recovery, sweat, and taste. A person working in heat might desire salt without knowing the molecular reason. The body is not always eloquent, but it is persistent. You taste the soup without salt. It is warm, nourishing, and slightly flat, like a song being hummed from the next room. Then you add a careful pinch. The flavour opens. Carrot becomes brighter. Onion becomes deeper. Chicken becomes fuller. Herbs step forward politely. Salt does not merely add saltiness. It changes how other flavours appear. This is why cooks treat it with such respect. Also why some people add too much and then pretend the recipe is rustic. Modern food science explains that salt can suppress bitterness, enhance sweetness in small amounts, change protein structure, influence fermentation, and affect texture. In bread, it strengthens gluten and slows yeast activity. In cheese, it controls moisture and microbial growth. In pickles and cured meats, it shapes preservation and flavour. Salt is both ingredient and instrument. It plays quietly in the background until it is missing, at which point everyone suddenly becomes an expert. You move into a laboratory from the early 20th century. The air smells of alcohol lamps, paper, glass, dust, and metal cabinets. Bottles stand in rows with careful labels. Scientists test minerals, bodily fluids, and foods. Public health workers begin paying close attention to iodine deficiency, especially in regions far from the sea where soils and diets may lack iodine. Without enough iodine, thyroid problems can develop, including goiter. The swelling at the neck is visible, common in some inland populations, and quietly devastating in its broader effects. Iodized salt becomes one of the great public health interventions of the 20th century. By adding tiny amounts of iodine to common salt, communities can reduce iodine deficiency across large populations. The idea is elegant because salt reaches almost everyone. Instead of asking each person to remember a special medicine, public health borrows an old habit at the table. A pinch becomes prevention. A quirky tidbit belongs to the early campaigns for iodized salt. In some places, people were suspicious of it at first. They wondered whether altered salt was strange, unnecessary, or even unsafe. Public health officials had to persuade households or grocers and producers that this small invisible addition mattered. It is gently funny and very human people who had accepted salt taxes, salt monopolies, salt roads, salt mines, and suspicious fish sauce could still look at iodized salt and say, "Wait, what have you done to my crystals?" You step into a grocery store aisle. Shelves hold table salt, sea salt, kosher salt, rock salt, flaky finishing salt, low sodium salt, smoked salt, pink salt, black salt, and blends with herbs. The air smells faintly of cardboard, cleaning products, coffee from another aisle, and cold air from the dairy cases. Modern abundance has given salt identities. Some are culinary, some are cultural, some are marketing dressed in a very nice label. A crystal from a distant mountain may look romantic in a grinder, though chemically it remains mostly sodium chloride, with tiny mineral differences and a much stronger sense of personal branding. Cooks care about texture. Fine table salt dissolves quickly. Coarse kosher salt is easier to pinch and scatter. Flaky sea salt gives a delicate crunch on finished food. Black salt used in South Asian cooking can smell sulphurous and egg-like. Smoked salt carries wood fire into a dish. These differences matter in kitchens. Even when the mineral core is familiar, salt becomes taste, craft, habit, memory, and identity. Historians still argue how to interpret the modern fear of salt. Some emphasize strong medical evidence linking high sodium intake with high blood pressure, in many people, an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Others point out that individual responses vary, and that the biggest problem is often processed food rather than the small pinch added at home. The debate is not really about whether the body needs salt. It does. The question is, how much, for whom, in what diet, and under what conditions. You sit with a doctor in a quiet clinic. The room smells of paper, antiseptic, and the faint plastic scent of examination gloves. A blood pressure cuff tightens around an arm with a soft squeeze. The doctor explains sodium intake gently, not as punishment, but as information. Less processed food, more fresh ingredients, careful reading of labels. Taste can adjust slowly. The patient nods, half listening, half thinking about soup. This too is history. The old mineral becoming part of chronic care and daily self-management. At a family table, the argument becomes warmer. One person says the food needs salt. Another says the doctor said no. A third says sea salt is healthier. A fourth says everything tasted better in childhood. Which is not a scientific position, but is emotionally difficult to challenge. Steam rises from bowls. Spoons clink. The salt shaker sits between them like a tiny mediator with poor training. Evening softens the room. You hold a few grains and feel them stick slightly to warm fingertips. Salt is no longer simply precious because it is rare. In many places, it is cheap, available, and hidden in large quantities inside packaged foods. Its danger is no longer only scarcity or taxation, but excess and invisibility. A mineral once guarded in storehouses now slips quietly into bread, sauces, snacks, soups, meats, and meals eaten too quickly under electric light. Yet it remains necessary. That is the strange tenderness of it. Salt cannot be dismissed. It cannot be worshipped without caution. It asks for balance, and balance is not humanity's strongest hobby. You return to the soup. One careful pinch is enough. The flavour rises, warm and complete, and the room grows calm around you. In the age of science and health, salt becomes a teacher of limits enough to sustain, enough to season, enough to protect. But not so much that the body carries a hidden burden. The little white crystals have ruled through power, trade, and hunger. Now they rule through measurement, advice, labels, cravings, and the quiet negotiations of the human body. You stand beside a road in winter, and the world has gone pale. Snow lies across the fields in soft folded sheets. Trees lift dark branches into a low white sky. The air is cold enough to sting the inside of your nose, and every breath feels sharp and clean. Beneath your boots, packed snow squeaks. A truck approaches slowly, lights glowing through the morning haze, and from its back a wide spray of salt scatters across the asphalt with a dry rattling hiss. The crystals strike the road and bounce like tiny bits of broken glass. This is one of salt's modern disguises: road safety. In cold climates, rock salt is spread on roads, sidewalks, parking lots, and bridges to help melt ice or prevent it from forming. Salt lowers the freezing point of water, turning dangerous sheets of ice into slush or liquid when conditions are right. For drivers, walkers, emergency vehicles, school buses, and late commuters who have already pressed snooze too many times, this can be life-saving. You watch the truck roll away. Its orange light blinks in the grey. Behind it, the road darkens where salt begins working into snow. Tyres make a wet, grinding sound. A cyclist passes carefully, shoulders tense. A woman in heavy gloves walks a dog whose paws lift uncertainly from the salted pavement. The air smells of exhaust, cold metal, wet wool, and a faint mineral tang rising from the road surface. Salt has become almost invisible in winter cities. It sits in municipal storage domes, piled high like artificial hills. It pours from spreaders, rests in buckets by doorways, crunches under shoes, stains leather boots, clings to car doors, and dries in white maps along the edges of trousers. It protects movement. It also leaves traces everywhere. You step into a public works yard where a mountain of road salt rises under a shelter. The pile is greyish-white, coarse, and glittering in the dim light. Its surface is crusted in ridges where loaders have bitten into it. A machine reverses with a warning beep, scoops salt, and drops it into a truck bed. The smell here is cold, dusty, oily, and metallic. Workers speak over engine noise, checking routes and weather reports. Their job is part science, part timing, part local wisdom, and part being blamed whenever the road is slippery, which is a tradition as dependable as winter itself. The mainstream fact is simple. Road salt became widely used in the 20th century as automobiles, highways, and expectations of year-round mobility expanded. People no longer accepted that snow and ice should stop everything for days. Cities and highway departments needed cheap, effective de-icing materials, and salt fit the need. It was abundant, transportable, and efficient within certain temperature ranges. But the story does not stay simple. When snow melts, salty runoff flows into gutters, storm drains, rivers, lakes, wetlands, and groundwater. It seeps into soil. It splashes onto roadside trees and plants. It corrodes metal in cars, bridges, guardrails, and concrete infrastructure. It can harm freshwater ecosystems by raising chloride levels. In ponds and lakes, salt can change water density and circulation, making it harder for oxygen to move through the water. A mineral spread for safety on land can quietly disturb life beneath the surface of winter streams. You follow meltwater along a curb. It runs black and slushy, carrying grit, oil, leaves, cigarette ends, and dissolved salt. The sound is small, a trickle beneath traffic. It disappears into a drain with a hollow gulp. Down there, the city's hidden water paths begin. The salt does not vanish, it has simply left sight, which is not the same as leaving consequence. A quirky tidbit appears on the sidewalk. Some pets dislike walking on salted surfaces because salt can irritate their paws. You see the dog again, pausing dramatically with one paw lifted as if delivering a silent legal complaint. Its owner bends down to wipe the paw with a mitten. The scene is small and almost comic, but it points to the broader truth salt that helps one body can bother another. You move to a roadside in early spring. Snow has retreated into dirty piles. The grass along the curb is brown and flattened. Cars pass with a whisper on wet pavement. White crusts remain where splashwater dried. A young maple near the road has scorched-looking leaves later in the season, its roots struggling with salt in the soil. Some plants tolerate salt better than others. Many roadside species suffer from repeated exposure. Roots take in salty water, leaves dry at the edges, and growth weakens. A tree cannot complain at a town meeting, which may be why people notice late. Cities and engineers try to reduce harm. They calibrate spreaders, pre-wet salt so it sticks better. Use brine before storms, improve storage, mix salt with sand or other materials, and experiment with alternatives such as calcium-magnesium acetate, beet juice blends, or other desers in some places. These options can help, though each has costs, limits, and its own environmental questions. There is no perfect crystal, no magical winter dust that clears roads, saves budgets, protects rivers, and politely rinses your car afterward. If there were, it would probably be taxed immediately. Historians and environmental scholars still debate how future cities should balance mobility, safety, cost, and ecological damage in winter maintenance. Some argue for reduced salt use through better technology and public tolerance for slower roads. Others emphasize that icy roads kill people, delay emergency care, and isolate communities. The problem is not whether salt works. It does. The question is how much safety should be bought with how much environmental burden, and who gets to decide. You stand on a bridge over a narrow river. The water moves dark beneath the ice at its edges. The air smells of thawing mud, cold stone, and distant traffic. A truck crosses behind you, tires humming below. The river carries winter's dissolved memory away from the city. Fish, insects, plants, and microorganisms live in that water. They do not know the road above. They only know the chemistry that arrives. Salt also enters modern life through hidden industrial pathways, drilling fluids, water softeners, food processing, plastics, paper, textiles, and chemicals. The road is only the most visible glitter. The mineral continues to serve comfort and convenience in ways easy to forget. It softens hard water in basements. It fills bags near supermarket doors. It flows through factories. It waits in blue pellets, white pellets, coarse crystals, brines, and powders. It has become ordinary infrastructure once more. Evening comes early. Streetlights flicker on, casting yellow pools across wet pavement. The salted road shines black between white banks. Cars move more confidently now. A bus sighs at a stop. People step down carefully, boots crunching in slush. Somewhere, a river receives another thin wash of chloride. Somewhere, a bridge girder rusts a little faster. Somewhere, a driver arrives home safely because the road held. You hold a handful of road salt from a bin near the curb. It is rougher than table salt, gritty with minerals and dust, cold enough to numb your palm. It does not feel romantic. It feels useful, blunt, and slightly troubling. That is the shape of much modern history. The same substance that preserves food and saves travellers can damage soil, water, metal, pores, and roots when used at scale. The night settles over the city. Snow begins again, soft and silent at first. The flakes vanish when they touch the salted pavement, leaving tiny dark spots that spread and join. Salt is still ruling, but not from palaces, caravans, or tax offices. It rules through maintenance schedules, winter budgets, storm warnings, chloride levels, rusted fenders, safer bridges, and the quiet cost of keeping motion possible when the world freezes. You return to the quiet salt cellar on a table at night. The room is almost still. A lamp glows softly, spreading warm light across wood grain, a folded cloth, a bowl, a spoon, and the small container of salt waiting beside them. Outside the window, the world is dark and hushed. Somewhere far away, a car passes with a low wet sound. Somewhere closer, the house settles with a gentle creak. The air smells faintly of tea, clean linen, old paper, and the simple meal that has just ended. You lift the salt cellar and feel its weight. Not much. A child could carry it. A tired hand could pass it across the table without thinking. Yet inside it rests a mineral that has wandered through nearly every chamber of human life. It has lived in bodies, tears, blood, oceans, mines, kitchens, temples, roads, ships, protests, factories, clinics, and winter streets. For something that disappears in water, salt has been remarkably difficult to erase. You pour a little into your palm. The grains catch the lamplight. They look clean, quiet, and final, though nothing about them is final. Salt is always moving. It dissolves into soup, sweats from skin, dries on shorelines, seeps into soil, crystallizes from brine, travels in sacks, settles in veins of rock, and returns again to water. It is less an object than a cycle that humans keep interrupting for breakfast. Mainstream history shows that salt's importance came from a simple truth: bodies need it, and food lasts longer with it. From that necessity grew production, trade, taxation, law, monopoly, labour, language, and resistance. Salt did not rule history alone. No single thing ever does, no matter how confidently a video title may wink at you. But salt had a rare talent for entering both the most private and most public spaces. It touched the tongue and the treasury. It sat in the pot and the policy. It fed workers and funded states. You look around the table and notice how ordinary power becomes invisible. The bread has salt in it. The butter has salt. The soup was corrected with a pinch. The pickled vegetables depend on it. The glass nearby belongs to an industrial chain once shaped by salt chemistry. The clean water in the cup may have passed through systems disinfected by chemicals made from brine. Even the road outside may have been cleared by salt in winter. The mineral is not only in the shaker, it is threaded through the room. A quirky tidbit waits in language. People speak of someone being worth their salt, of taking things with a grain of salt, of salty speech, of the salt of the earth. These phrases survived because salt became a measure of value: skepticism, character, flavour, and sharpness. Language keeps old economies long after the coins have changed. It is strangely sweet that a mineral with no sweetness at all became a way to praise reliable people. Apparently, humanity decided that being dependable and slightly abrasive was admirable. Fair enough. You imagine all the hands that carried salt, a worker scraping crystals from a pan under the sun, a miner striking rock underground by lamplight, a trader tying blocks onto camels, a sailor opening a barrel of preserved food with weary suspicion, a mother packing vegetables into brine, a clerk recording quantities in ink, a rebel lifting illegal salt from the shore, a doctor advising less sodium, a road worker loading a truck before snow. Each hand is different, but the mineral feels the same: dry, sharp, small, necessary. Historians still argue whether salt should be placed at the centre of world history or treated as one essential material among many. There is wisdom in caution: grain, water, iron, wood, coal, oil, cotton, sugar, and countless other substances shaped human society. Yet salt deserves its place because it reveals a pattern. The things humans cannot live without become roots into power. Need becomes trade. Trade becomes regulation. Regulation becomes resentment. Resentment sometimes becomes rebellion. And then, quite often, everyone still has to make dinner. You walk through one last imagined landscape. Not one empire or one century, but a slow procession of places. A pale shore where seawater dries. A Neolithic hearth steaming with brine. A Nile workshop scented with resin and natron. A Mesopotamian storehouse marked by clay tablets. A Chinese well drawing hidden brine from deep earth. A desert caravan under stars. A medieval town breathing smoke. A Venetian lagoon shining at dawn. A northern harbour stacked with fish barrels. A ship's hold heavy with salted meat. A village kitchen counting taxed grains. An Indian beach where a handful becomes defiance. A factory glowing orange. A clinic with a blood pressure cuff. A winter road glittering under streetlights. None of these scenes repeats the same lesson exactly. Salt changes with each world that uses it. It is sacred in one place, taxable in another, medicinal in another, industrial in another, dangerous in the excess, precious in scarcity, and boring only to those who have never gone without it. You close your fingers gently around the grains. Their edges press into your skin, then warm. The touch is small and grounding. Salt asks you to think about dependence without shame. Every human life is built from needs: water, food, shelter, care, memory, rest. Civilization can decorate those needs with marble, music, law, and ceremony. But beneath it all, the body remains honest. It sweats, it hungers, it heals, it craves. The lamp flickers softly. The room grows quieter. Outside, the night folds itself around rooftops, rivers, roads, and sleeping fields. Somewhere, the sea continues its dark breathing. Somewhere underground, ancient salt beds lie still in stone. Somewhere in a kitchen not unlike this one, a person tastes a pot and adds a pinch, unaware that the gesture belongs to thousands of years of human history. And that is where salt leaves you not in a palace, not on a battlefield, not in a ledger, but at the table, where history becomes intimate enough to taste. The salt cellar rests again beside the bowl. The grains inside are silent now. Let the old roads fade. Let the caravans grow distant. Let the mines cool. The ships drift beyond the horizon. The markets close their shutters, and the winter streets soften under falling snow. Your breath slows. The world becomes simple lamplight, quiet wood, a trace of salt on the tongue, and the deep calm of knowing that even the smallest things can carry enormous stories. The night holds them gently, the sea holds its ancient memory, the earth keeps its white seams in darkness, and you, warm and still, may let the history dissolve at last, grain by grain, into sleep.